Welcome to the Cheating Tales Lab. We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Jack Thornton's sensible sedan rolled into the driveway of his modest suburban home at 4:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. The 35-year-old high school history teacher sighed. This wasn't how the annual Gettysburg field trip was supposed to end. "Damn you, Tommy Hawkins," Jack muttered, remembering the sickly pale face of the freshman who decorated the tour bus floor with his lunch. The kid had claimed motion sickness, but Jack strongly suspected it had more to do with the 6 hot dogs Tommy had inhaled at the Battlefield Cafe. As he approached the front door, briefcase in hand, Jack heard his wife Sarah's hushed voice drifting through an open window. Sarah was many things, but quiet wasn't one of them. Curiosity piqued, he paused, key hovering near the lock. "I'll be the best wife and mother to them, until Jack gets his wealthy father's inheritance. Then I'll take everything in divorce." Jack's world tilted on its axis. He must have misheard. There was no way Sarah, his Sarah of 10 years, would say something like that. They'd talked about having kids, for Christ's sake. But as he stood there, rooted to the spot, Sarah's voice continued. "Don't worry, Robert. I've got it all planned out. Jack doesn't suspect a thing. He's such a Boy Scout, always so trusting. It's almost too easy." With trembling hands, Jack pulled out his phone and hit record, capturing the tail end of Sarah's conversation. I know. It's taking longer than we thought. But Jack's father isn't exactly on death's door. We just need to be patient. Once I have the money, we can start our new life together. Yes, I love you too. I'll call you later." The sound of Sarah's footsteps approaching snapped Jack out of his daze. He retreated to his car, fumbling with the keys before managing to start the engine and pull away. He drove aimlessly, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of betrayal and disbelief. He found himself at a nearby park, the place where he and Sarah had their first date. The irony wasn't lost on him as he parked and stumbled out of the car. He collapsed onto a bench, his legs suddenly too weak to support him. With shaking hands, he replayed the recording. Each word was a dagger to his heart, confirming that he hadn't imagined it. His wife, the woman he'd pledged to love and cherish till death do them part, was nothing but a gold-digging fraud. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Jack pulled out his phone again. This time, he wasn't recording. He was researching. Divorce laws, inheritance rights, anything that might give him an edge in the battle he knew was coming. He'd never been one for confrontation. He was a history teacher, for God's sake. He dealt in facts and dates, not legal warfare. But as he sat there, watching families stroll by and couples holding hands, something hardened inside him. He'd be damned if he'd let Sarah and this Robert character take everything he'd worked for. By the time darkness fell, Jack had a plan. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He'd need help, though. Professional help. And he knew just who to call. The next morning found Jack sitting in the sleek, modern office of Diane Lopez, divorce attorney extraordinaire. She had a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom, which was exactly what Jack needed right now. Diane listened impassively as Jack recounted his story, her face betraying no emotion. When he finished, she leaned back in her leather chair, fingers steepled under her chin. "Well, Mr. Thornton, you've certainly found yourself in quite the predicament," she said, her voice cool and professional. "The good news is you've got solid evidence of your wife's intentions. That recording will be invaluable." Jack nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since he'd overheard Sarah's conversation. "The bad news," Diane continued, "is that your wife clearly has a plan, and if she's been working on this for a while, she may have already taken steps to protect herself. We need to move quickly." She outlined a strategy that made Jack's head spin. Gather more evidence, secure assets, prepare for a clean break. It all sounded so clinical, so devoid of emotion. But then again, that's probably what he needed right now. "One more thing, Mr. Thornton," Diane said as Jack stood to leave. "Don't tip your hand. Act normal until we're ready to make our move. Can you do that?" Jack thought about the betrayal, the lies, The years of his life wasted on a woman who saw him as nothing more than a meal ticket. He thought about the future he'd planned, now turned to ashes. "Yes," he said, his voice hard. "I can do that." The drive home was a blur. Jack's mind raced with everything Diane had told him, everything he needed to do. But as he pulled into his driveway, a sense of calm settled over him. He had a plan now. He wasn't helpless. He found Sarah in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment, Jack's resolve wavered. How could this be the same woman who had so coldly discussed destroying his life? "Hey, honey," Sarah said, leaning in for a kiss. "How was your day?" Jack forced himself to smile, to act normal. "Oh, the usual. Kids who'd rather be anywhere but in class." He watched her as she turned back to her chopping, chattering away about her day at the office. How many times had they done this? How many evenings had he sat here, listening to her stories, thinking they were building a life together? "Sarah," he said, interrupting her mid-sentence, "we need to talk." She turned, a look of confusion on her face. "What's wrong?" Jack took a deep breath. This was it. No turning back now. "I know about your plan," he said, his voice steady. "I know about Robert." The knife Sarah had been holding clattered to the floor. Her face went pale, then flushed red. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. Jack pulled out his phone, playing the damning recording. As Sarah listened, her face cycled through a range of emotions: shock, anger, fear. "It was just a hypothetical conversation," she said weakly when the recording ended. "I was just talking to a friend about—" "Save it," Jack cut her off. He pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase. "These are divorce papers. I want you out of the house. Tonight." Sarah's demeanor changed in an instant. The mask of the loving wife fell away, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." But Jack was already moving, heading for their shared office. With quick, precise movements, he began canceling their joint credit cards and transferring funds from their shared accounts to ones in his name only. Sarah followed, her voice rising in pitch and volume as she hurled insults and threats. Jack tuned her out, focusing on the task at hand. When he finished, he turned to face her. "You have an hour to pack your things and leave," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property." As Sarah stomped off to pack, Jack felt a strange sense of detachment. This woman, this stranger in his house, was no longer his wife. She was an opponent, nothing more. True to his word, an hour later, Jack changed the locks. He watched from the window as Sarah's car disappeared down the street, her taillights fading into the distance. He knew it wasn't over. Sarah wouldn't give up that easily. But for now, he had breathing room. Time to plan his next move. The next morning, Jack met with Elena Ramirez, the principal of Jefferson High where he taught. She was a stern woman with kind eyes, always fair but never a pushover. Jack had always respected her, and now he found himself grateful for her no-nonsense attitude. "Elena," he said, his voice grave, "I need to request an extended leave of absence. There's been a family emergency." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't press for details. "Of course, Jack. Take whatever time you need. Your students will miss you, but we can arrange for a substitute." Jack nodded, relief washing over him. One less loose end to worry about. Back at the house, Jack began the process of dismantling his life. He sold most of his belongings, keeping only essentials and a few sentimental items. It felt oddly liberating, shedding the trappings of his old life. As he worked, he thought about his father, William Thornton. They hadn't spoken in years, their relationship strained by old resentments and misunderstandings. But now, with Sarah's plan out in the open, Jack knew he had to warn him. The phone call was awkward, stilted. Jack didn't reveal the full extent of what had happened, just enough to put his father on guard against Sarah's machinations. "Dad," he said, his voice rough with emotion, I know we've had our differences, but please be careful. Sarah, she's not who we thought she was." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When William spoke, his voice was gruff but not unkind. "I appreciate the warning, son. Take care of yourself. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe," Jack thought, "something good could come out of this mess after all." With his affairs in order and his father warned, Jack was ready for the final step of his plan. He needed to disappear. He withdrew a large amount of cash from his accounts, enough to live on for a while, without leaving an electronic trail. He bought a used car from a private seller, paying in cash. And then, in the dead of night, he drove away from the life he'd known, heading west with no real destination in mind. As the miles rolled by, Jack thought about Sarah. By now, she would have realized he was gone. He could imagine her frantic calls to their mutual friends, her increasingly desperate attempts to locate him through his workplace. But she would find nothing. Jack Thornton, high school history teacher and devoted husband, had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks as Jack made his way across the country. He took odd jobs here and there, paying in cash and using fake names. He slept in cheap motels or in his car, always moving, never staying in one place long enough to be remembered. Finally, after nearly a month on the road, he found himself in Portland, Oregon. Something about the city called to him. Maybe it was the constant drizzle, matching his mood. Or maybe it was just far enough from his old life to feel safe. He found a small apartment in a nondescript neighborhood and started looking for work. His teaching credentials were useless now. Using them would leave a trail Sarah could follow. But he had other skills. He started advertising his services as a private tutor, specializing in history and literature. Slowly, cautiously, Jack began to build a new life. He made a few acquaintances, though he was careful to keep everyone at arm's length. He couldn't risk getting close to anyone, not when his past could come crashing down on him at any moment. At night, alone in his sparse apartment, Jack would sometimes think about Sarah. He wondered if she was still with Robert, if they were already spending his father's money. He wondered if she ever felt guilty about what she'd done. But mostly, he thought about the future. For the first time in his adult life, he was truly on his own. No wife, no job, no roots tying him down. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating. He had a chance to reinvent himself, to become someone new. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Jack slowly began to heal. The pain of Sarah's betrayal never fully went away, but it became duller, more manageable. He threw himself into his work, building a reputation as an excellent tutor. He even started developing online history courses, finding a new passion in bringing the past to life for students around the world. Jack Thornton, the betrayed husband and disillusioned teacher, was gone. In his place stood a new man, one forged in the crucible of betrayal and determination. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. Jack Thornton stared at his computer screen, the harsh glow illuminating his face in the dim Portland apartment. At 41, his hair had a bit more gray, and lines had formed around his eyes. But those eyes still held the same intensity they had 6 years ago when he'd fled Cincinnati. The clock on his desk read 2:17 a.m. Another late night, working on his online history courses. Who knew that abandoning his teaching career would lead him here? Turns out, there was a whole world of students hungry for knowledge beyond the confines of a traditional classroom. His phone buzzed, startling him. Who the hell would be calling at this hour? The number wasn't one he recognized, but it had a Cincinnati area code. His heart raced as he answered. "Hello, is this Jack Thornton?" The voice was unfamiliar, clinical. "Who's asking?" "This is Mercy Hospital in Cincinnati. I'm calling about your father, William Thornton. He's been admitted and you're listed as his emergency contact." Jack's world tilted on its axis. His father, the man he hadn't spoken to in years, save for that cryptic warning about Sarah. How is he? Jack managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. The nurse's voice softened. "I'm afraid it's quite serious, Mr. Thornton. Your father is asking for you." Jack closed his eyes, memories flooding back. The bitter arguments, the disappointment in his father's eyes, the years of silence. And now this. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he heard himself say. As he hung up, Jack's mind raced. Going back to Cincinnati meant facing everything he'd run from. Sarah, the life he'd left behind, the possibility that his father's inheritance, the very thing that had sparked this whole mess, might now be within reach. He booked the first flight out, throwing clothes into a suitcase with trembling hands. As the plane took off, Jack stared out the window, watching Portland disappear beneath him. He was leaving behind 6 years of carefully constructed anonymity. What would he find waiting for him in Cincinnati? The hospital corridor seemed endless. The smell of disinfectant burning Jack's nostrils as he made his way to his father's room. He paused outside the door, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him. There, sitting by his father's bedside, was Sarah, his Sarah, the woman who'd plotted to destroy him, now playing the role of doting daughter-in-law. She looked up as he entered, her eyes widening in shock. "Jack!" she gasped. Before he could respond, a weak voice came from the bed. "Son, is that you?" Jack turned to see his father, a frail shadow of the imposing man he'd once been. William Thornton's eyes were sunken, his skin sallow, but a spark of life returned to them as he gazed at his long-lost son. "Dad," Jack said, moving to the bedside. "I'm here." William's hand trembled as he reached for Jack's. "I didn't think you'd come." "Of course I came," Jack replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. He glanced at Sarah, who was watching the reunion with an unreadable expression. "Jack," William said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's someone I want you to meet." He gestured weakly to the other side of the bed. Jack hadn't even noticed the other man in the room. As he looked up, he felt the floor drop out from under him. "This is Robert," William said. "Your uncle. He and Sarah have been taking care of me." Uncle Robert, the name from Sarah's phone call 6 years ago, the man she'd planned to run away with. Jack's mind reeled as he struggled to process this new information. Robert stepped forward, offering his hand. "It's good to finally meet you, Jack. I've heard so much about you." Jack shook the hand automatically, feeling as if he'd stepped into some bizarre alternate reality. His uncle, the man his wife had been having an affair with, was his own flesh and blood. As the shock began to wear off, Jack's analytical mind kicked in. He observed the way Sarah and Robert stood slightly apart, the nervous glances they exchanged. It was clear they'd been working together, manipulating his father for years. A movement caught Jack's eye. A nurse had entered the room, her dark eyes taking in the tense scene. She moved to check William's vitals, offering Jack a sympathetic smile. "I'm Maria," she said softly. "I've been taking care of your father. It's good to see him smile again." Jack nodded, grateful for the momentary distraction. As Maria worked, he noticed her watching the interactions between Sarah, Robert, and his father with a furrowed brow. She seemed to sense the undercurrents of tension in the room. As Jack stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and this new, unexpected player, he made a decision. He couldn't run away again. Not this time. His father needed him, and he needed answers. "I'm staying," he announced, meeting Sarah's startled gaze. "For as long as it takes." Robert clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that made Jack's skin crawl. "That's wonderful news, nephew. We have so much catching up to do." Jack forced a smile, his mind already formulating a plan. He'd come back to Cincinnati to say goodbye to his father. Now, it seemed, he had a mystery to solve and a truth to uncover. As he settled into the chair by his father's bedside, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and treacherous journey. But this time, he was ready. This time, he wouldn't be caught off guard. Let the games begin, he thought, watching Sarah and Robert exchange worried glances. "I'm not the same man who left 6 years ago, and this time I'm not running away." The funeral was a somber affair, the kind William Thornton would have hated. Jack stood at the graveside, surrounded by people he barely recognized, all offering condolences with varying degrees of sincerity. Sarah and Robert hovered nearby, playing their parts to perfection. As the last of the mourners drifted away, Marcus Chun, the family attorney, approached Jack. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his voice low. "When you're ready, we need to discuss your father's will." Jack nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. He'd known this moment was inevitable, but that didn't make it any easier. The reading of the will took place in Marcus's office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old books. Jack sat across from Sarah and Robert, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus cleared his throat and began to read. "I, William Thornton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my estate as follows." What followed was unlike anything Jack had expected. His father, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic even in death. The will laid out a series of conditions, tasks that the potential heirs would need to complete to prove their loyalty and worthiness. "This is ridiculous," Sarah sputtered, her carefully crafted mask slipping for a moment. "We've been caring for William for years. Surely that counts for something." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The will is quite clear, Mrs. Thornton. All potential heirs must complete the task set forth." Robert leaned forward, his face a study in false concern. "But what about Jack? He abandoned the family. Surely he's not eligible." Jack felt a surge of anger, but he kept his voice calm. "I didn't abandon anyone. I left because of circumstances beyond my control." He met Sarah's eyes, watching her flinch at the implied accusation. Marcus held up a hand. "Regardless of past events, the will states that all family members have the right to participate, including Jack." What followed was a bitter battle, fought not with fists or weapons, but with legal maneuvers and carefully worded accusations. Sarah and Robert contested the will, throwing everything they had at discrediting Jack. But Jack wasn't without resources of his own. He presented evidence of Sarah's original plan, hinting at Robert's involvement without revealing his full hand. The recording he'd made 6 years ago became a powerful weapon, though he used it sparingly, aware that it was his ace in the hole. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself immersed in a world of legal jargon and family politics. He discovered depths of strength he didn't know he possessed, standing firm against the onslaught of Sarah and Robert's machinations. But it wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. As Jack dug deeper, he began to uncover troubling inconsistencies in the family company's finances. Late-night research sessions and clandestine meetings with loyal employees painted a disturbing picture of embezzlement and fraud. One night, as Jack pored over financial records in his hotel room, he heard a soft knock at the door. He opened it to find Sarah standing there, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. He watched as she paced the room, wringing her hands. "I didn't know," she finally said. "About Robert, about the company. I swear, Jack, I had no idea how deep this went." Jack studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "Why should I believe you?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Because I'm trapped, Jack. I made a terrible mistake, and now I don't know how to get out." As Sarah poured out her story, Jack felt a mix of emotions: anger, pity, and a grudging admiration for her survival instinct. She painted a picture of manipulation and deceit, with Robert as the puppet master pulling all the strings. When she finished, Jack remained silent for a long moment. "I can't trust you," he finally said. "But if what you're saying is true, we might be able to help each other." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "For now, nothing. Act normal. Let Robert think he's still in control. I'll be in touch." As Sarah left, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. He might have just gained an unexpected ally in this fight, but he couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. Not when there was still so much at stake. Jack woke to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly. Bleary-eyed, he reached for it, squinting at the screen. It was Elena Ramirez, his old principal from Jefferson High. "Jack, have you seen the news?" He sat up, instantly alert. "What news?" "It's all over the local stations. Sarah and Robert, they're saying terrible things about you. Elder abuse, abandonment, theft from the family business." "Jack, what's going on?" Jack's mind raced. He'd expected Robert to fight dirty. But this was a declaration of war. He flipped on the TV, his stomach churning as he watched Sarah, tears in her eyes, recount how he'd abandoned his family. Robert stood beside her, playing the role of the supportive uncle to perfection. "Jack Thornton is not the man we thought he was," Robert said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "He left his family behind, ignored his father's illness, and now he wants to swoop in and claim an inheritance he doesn't deserve." Jack's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from his online course platform. His ratings were plummeting, flooded with one-star reviews and accusations of fraud. "Damn it," he muttered, realizing the scope of Robert's attack. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. Robert was trying to destroy everything Jack had built. He needed allies and fast. He dialed Elena back. "Elena, I need your help. Everything they're saying, it's not true. I can explain, but I need time." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "What do you need?" Jack felt a surge of gratitude. "Can you reach out to my old colleagues, my students, anyone who knew me before? I need character witnesses, people who can vouch for me." "Consider it done," Elena said. "And Jack, we've got your back." As he hung up, Jack's mind was already formulating a plan. He couldn't match Robert's media blitz dollar for dollar, but he had something Robert didn't: the truth. He set up a live stream, reaching out to his online students around the world. For hours, he told his story, laying bare the betrayal that had driven him from Cincinnati. He showed evidence of his continued work in education, the lives he'd touched through his online courses. As he spoke, messages of support flooded in. Former students shared stories of how he'd inspired them. Colleagues vouched for his character. Even some of his current online students, scattered across the globe, joined in to defend their teacher. But Robert wasn't done. As Jack's counteroffensive gained traction, his website came under attack. A sophisticated DDoS assault brought down his entire online infrastructure. Jack was at his wit's end when his phone rang again. This time, it was a voice from the past. "Jack, it's Mike. Mike Lawson. Remember me?" Jack's mind flashed back to summers spent playing baseball, shared confidences, a friendship that had once seemed unbreakable. "Mike, yeah, of course. It's been a long time. Listen, I've been seeing what's happening on the news. It doesn't add up. The Jack I knew would never do the things they're saying. I'm a detective now. If you need help getting to the bottom of this, I'm in." Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Mike, you have no idea how much that means. There's a lot I need to tell you." As Jack filled Mike in on the details of the past 6 years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The tide was turning. Robert and Sarah had overplayed their hand, and now the truth was starting to come out. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. As he ended the call with Mike, he steeled himself for what lay ahead. The inheritance, his reputation, his very future. It was all on the line. But for the first time since he'd returned to Cincinnati, Jack felt ready. He had allies. He had the truth on his side. And he had a score to settle. Let Robert and Sarah bring their worst, he thought. "I'm not running anymore. This ends here, one way or another." Jack Thornton sat in his dimly lit hotel room, surrounded by stacks of documents and a laptop screen glowing with financial records. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted but determined. The inheritance battle had taken its toll, but he knew he was close to uncovering something big. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Kate Blackwell, the private investigator he'd hired to dig into Robert's past. Her face was grim, her eyes sharp with purpose. "We need to talk," she said. brushing past him into the room. Jack closed the door, his heart racing. "What did you find?" Kate pulled out a thick file from her bag. "Your uncle's been a busy boy, Jack, and not in a good way." For the next hour, Kate laid out a pattern of behavior that made Jack's stomach churn. Elder abuse, spanning years and multiple victims. Fraud that went beyond the family company, touching businesses across the state. And most disturbing of all, connections to organized crime that hinted at even darker dealings. "Jesus," Jack muttered, leafing through the evidence. "This is worse than I thought." Kate nodded. "Your uncle's made some powerful friends and some dangerous enemies. You need to be careful, Jack. This goes beyond a family squabble now." Jack's mind raced. He needed to act, but he had to be smart about it. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. "I need to make a call," he said, reaching for his phone. The number he dialed wasn't one he'd ever used before, but it was one he'd memorized just in case. When a woman's voice answered, Jack took a deep breath. "This is Jack Thornton. I have information about Robert Thornton that the FBI might be interested in." Special Agent Samantha Torres listened intently as Jack laid out what he knew, careful to keep his own involvement anonymous. When he finished, there was a long pause. "Mr. Thornton, if what you're saying is true, we'll need to move quickly. Can you come in to make a formal statement?" Jack agreed, setting up a meeting for the next day. As he hung up, he felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The wheels were in motion now. There was no turning back. Over the next few weeks, Jack found himself living a double life. By day, he continued the inheritance battle, presenting a calm facade to Sarah and Robert, but his nights were filled with clandestine meetings with Agent Torres, poring over evidence and building a case against his uncle, to maintain his cover and begin rebuilding his tarnished reputation. Jack started volunteering at a local veteran center. The work was rewarding, giving him a sense of purpose beyond the legal battles and investigations. It was at the center that he ran into Maria Gonzalez, the nurse who had cared for his father. She was there visiting her grandfather, a Korean War vet. "Jack," she said, surprise evident in her voice, "I didn't expect to see you here." He explained about the volunteer work, watching as her face softened with understanding. "That's wonderful," she said. "These men and women, they've been through so much. It's good to see someone caring for them." As they talked, Jack found himself opening up to Maria in a way he hadn't with anyone since returning to Cincinnati. She listened without judgment, offering support and, occasionally, valuable information about Robert's visits to the hospital during William's illness. Their friendship grew over shared cups of terrible hospital coffee and late-night conversations. Jack found himself looking forward to their talks, a bright spot in the increasingly tense atmosphere of the inheritance battle. But even as Jack made progress, he could see Robert beginning to unravel. The man's behavior became erratic, his temper shorter. Sarah, caught between the two men, looked increasingly haggard and afraid. The diner was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the worn Formica tables. Jack sat in a booth near the back, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. His eyes flicked to the door every few seconds, tension coiling in his gut. When Sarah walked in, he almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, confident woman he'd married. In her place was someone smaller, hunched as if expecting a blow. "Jack," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I thank you for meeting me." He nodded, studying her face. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but the fear in her eyes was fresh. "I know about Robert's crimes," he said without preamble. "All of it. The elder abuse, the fraud, the mob connections. It's over, Sarah." She flinched, then sagged, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "What are you going to do? The FBI is already involved, but they need more. They need someone on the inside." Jack leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "That's where you come in." Sarah's eyes widened. "You want me to testify against Robert?" "Jack, you don't understand. He'll kill me. We can protect you, Jack insisted. But this is your chance, Sarah. Your chance to make things right. For a long moment, Sarah was silent, her fingers tracing patterns on the scratched tabletop. When she looked up, there was a determination in her eyes that Jack remembered from their early days together. Okay, she said. I'll do it. For William. For us. For everything I destroyed. Jack felt a weight lift from his chest. This was it. The final piece they needed to bring Robert down. As they stood to leave, the diner's bell jingled. Jack looked up to see Robert standing in the doorway, his face a mask of rage. You bitch, Robert snarled, advancing on Sarah. I knew you'd betray me. Everything happened in a blur. Robert reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun. Sarah screamed, and Jack moved. Years of pent-up anger and betrayal fueled him as he lunged at Robert. His hand closed around Robert's wrist, twisting the gun away. They grappled, crashing into tables and chairs. Jack was dimly aware of Sarah shouting, of the diner's other patrons fleeing. But his focus was entirely on Robert, on the madness in the other man's eyes. With a move he'd learned during his years away, Jack managed to disarm Robert, sending the gun skittering across the floor. He pinned his uncle to the ground, panting heavily. It's over, Jack growled. You've lost. As if on cue, the diner's door burst open, and FBI agents poured in, led by Agent Torres. As they cuffed Robert, Jack became aware of a dull pain in his side. He looked down to see a growing red stain on his shirt. Jack! Sarah cried, rushing to his side. Oh, God, you're hurt. He waved her off, his eyes meeting Agent Torres. Tell me you got all that on camera. The agent nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Every second. You did good, Thornton. As paramedics swarmed around him, Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. It was done. Finally, after all these years, it was done. The courtroom was packed, a low murmur of voices filling the air. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table, his side still tender from the knife wound Robert had managed to inflict during their struggle. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional weight of the past few months. As the judge entered and called the court to order, Jack's eyes swept the room. Sarah sat on the defendant's side, looking small and defeated. Robert, in his prison jumpsuit, glared daggers at anyone who dared meet his gaze. The proceedings moved quickly. FBI agent Torres presented the evidence gathered during their investigation, laying out a damning case of embezzlement, elder abuse, tax evasion, and attempted murder. When it was Jack's turn to testify, he stood tall, his voice steady as he recounted the events that had led them all to this moment. The recording of Sarah's phone call from 6 years ago played through the courtroom speakers, and Jack watched as the color drained from Robert's face. But the real surprise came when Marcus Chun, the family attorney, took the stand. The normally unflappable lawyer looked nervous as he cleared his throat. Your Honor, he began, I have a confession to make. For the past several years, I've been gathering evidence against Robert Thornton at the behest of the late William Thornton. A gasp went through the courtroom. Jack leaned forward, his heart pounding. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. William suspected Robert's criminal activities long before his death. He made me promise to keep silent until the truth could be revealed in full. The evidence I've collected corroborates everything Mr. Jack Thornton and the FBI have presented. As Marcus detailed years of Robert's misdeeds, Jack felt a complex mix of emotions. Grief for his father, who had known the truth but couldn't share it. Anger at the years of deception, and a bittersweet pride that William had, in his own way, been looking out for Jack all along. The judge's ruling, when it came, was decisive. Robert was found guilty on all counts, facing decades in prison. The family business and William's entire estate were awarded to Jack, as the only remaining heir untainted by criminal activity. As Robert was led away in handcuffs, still hurling threats and insults, Jack felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Sarah standing there, tears streaming down her face. Jack, she said, her voice breaking. "I know I have no right to ask this, but can you ever forgive me?" Jack looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the woman who had betrayed him, but the girl he had fallen in love with all those years ago. He thought of all the pain, all the lost years, all the what-ifs that had haunted him. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm, "I forgive you, not for you, but for me. I need to let go of this anger if I'm ever going to move on. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We can't go back. You understand that, right?" She nodded, a sad smile on her face. "I understand. Thank you, Jack, for everything." As Sarah walked away, Jack felt a chapter of his life closing, but instead of sadness, he felt a sense of possibility. He had his father's legacy to uphold, a chance to do some real good in the world. In the weeks that followed, Jack threw himself into establishing a foundation for education and elder care. He used his inheritance to fund scholarships for underprivileged students and to improve conditions in nursing homes across the state. As he stood at the podium during the foundation's opening ceremony, Jack thought about the long, twisted road that had led him here. He thought about his father, about Sarah, about Robert, about the man he had been and the man he had become. "My father once told me that true strength isn't about how hard you can hit," Jack said to the assembled crowd. "It's about how much you can take and keep moving forward. This foundation is about moving forward. It's about taking the pain of the past and turning it into hope for the future." As applause filled the auditorium, Jack felt, for the first time in years, truly at peace. He had faced his demons, righted the wrongs of the past, and found a purpose that gave his life meaning. The story of Jack Thornton, the betrayed husband and prodigal son, was over. But the story of Jack Thornton, the man who turned tragedy into triumph, was just beginning. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I think I completely caught her off guard. I'm almost certain she expected me to say, "Yes, dear," and then follow along with whatever she wanted, just like I always had before. After all, hadn't that always been the pattern? She was used to me acquiescing, doing what she asked without question. I met Nora Bethany during my second year of college. We were both business management majors, enrolled in a production management class, and happened to be assigned to the same project. I was immediately drawn to her. Her looks, her personality, and her sense of humor. I asked her out, and to my delight, she said yes. Our relationship blossomed from there. We were inseparable during our junior year, and by the beginning of senior year, I proposed. She accepted, and we were married just a month after graduation. Soon after, we both found jobs, settling into the typical middle-class lifestyle. Everything seemed perfect, or at least, that's what I thought. Both Nora Bethany and I were thriving in our respective careers when everything began to change. After we found out we were expecting, Nora Bethany made the decision to step away from the workforce and dedicate herself to being a full-time mother. I supported her choice, knowing it would bring fulfillment to her life, while I continued to focus on my career. Over the years, I worked tirelessly, steadily climbing the corporate ladder. By the time I reached the position of regional manager, we were blessed with 3 wonderful children. I considered myself incredibly fortunate. I had a wife who loved me deeply, a woman who spoiled me with affection and care, and 3 beautiful children who were the center of my world. At the same time, my career was flourishing, and I was quickly gaining recognition as a rising star in the company. It wasn't just about the success, it was the fact that I truly loved my job. It gave me a sense of purpose and fulfillment that mirrored the joy I felt at home with my family. Life, in that moment, felt like it was exactly how it was meant to be. It is a fact of corporate life that as you climb the corporate ladder, the workload gets heavier and heavier until you finally reach the point where you can delegate. I hadn't yet reached that point, but I was closing in on it. The heavier workload translated into late nights at the office and a lot of times when I had to bring work home with me. Those times meant a lot of late nights and busy weekends for me, but I didn't care because I had a goal. The vice president of sales and marketing was retiring in a month, and I was one of 3 men who had a shot at getting the position. Once there, my workload would only be a third of what I was doing in trying to get there. More responsibility, a lot of high-level decision-making, but I would be able to delegate the nuts and bolts work to subordinates. But first I had to get there, and that meant hard work, and hard work meant a pissed-off Nora Bethany. Nora Bethany had been planning a weekend getaway for us for almost 2 months. It was to be 4 nights and 5 days at Aspen, and she had already made the hotel reservations, purchased the lift tickets, arranged for her parents to take the kids, and started packing her bags. 2 days before we were to leave, I told her that I had to cancel. We have a project fastly approaching a deadline, and it is in trouble. I'm going to have to ride herd on it until it is done. Damn it, Walter. You can't do this to me again. That damn job had interfered with our last 4 vacations, 6 of our last 7 anniversaries, and caused you to forget every one of my birthdays for the last 10 years. You owe me this weekend, Walter. You owe me and I want it. Be reasonable, Nora Bethany. If I pull this project through on time, I'm almost a shoo-in for Benson's job when he retires. Is that what this is all about? Making points to get Benson's job? You make that sound like a bad thing. It isn't a bad thing. It is a stupid thing. I just now realized I lost all those vacations, anniversaries, and birthdays because I kept my mouth shut. What does that mean? Nothing, Walter. Just go work on your damned project while I finish packing. Finish packing? Yes, Walter. Finish packing. I'm going with or without you. But I am going. You would go without me? Do you think that would be wise? A married woman alone? That would be like wearing a neon sign saying, "Here I am. Show me a good time." I fully intend to have a good time, Walter. I'd rather have it with you, but I'll manage if you don't go. Really, Nora Bethany, I don't. Just go to your reports, Walter, or whatever. I'm going, and that's that. I'm through letting your goddamn job interfere with things. The day we were supposed to leave for Aspen came, and when I got home from work, I found Nora Bethany putting the last of her suitcases in the car. I took one last shot at trying to get her to be reasonable. I'm serious, Nora Bethany. Going to Aspen alone is not a good idea. So come with me, Walter. You know I can't do that. I have to make sure that this project doesn't go belly up. I save the project, and I know I'll get Benson's job, and then things will get a lot easier. There won't be any more screwed-up vacations or forgotten birthdays and anniversaries. I'll be in a decision-making position. Someone else will be doing the donkey work. That's nice, Walter, but I've been looking forward to this weekend for 2 months now, and I'd rather you go with me, but I'm going. I still don't think it is a good idea for you to go alone. I won't be alone, Walter. What does that mean? I'll call you tonight, Walter, after I get checked in at the hotel. Nora, enjoy your project, Walter, and she got in the car and backed down the drive. I stood there watching her go, and I wondered about her "I won't be alone" remark. As she turned the corner at the end of the block, I put it out of my mind and went into the house. I was reviewing some specifications when the phone rang. It was Nora Bethany, and she gave me her room number and the phone number of the hotel. She sounded out of breath, and I asked her why. I just did 25 laps in the indoor pool. I'm curious, Nora Bethany. What did you mean when you said you wouldn't be alone? Did I say that? Yes, you did. I must have meant that I expect to get hit on a lot while I'm here. I'm not a bad-looking broad, in case you have forgotten. I expect that I'll be kept on the dance floor all night. I probably won't even have to buy a drink after my first one. Well, I'm dripping wet, and I need to get out of this bathing suit and take a shower. I love you, baby. See you in 5 days. And she hung up. Now, I've never had any reason to doubt Nora Bethany, but to be absolutely honest about it, it was mostly because I didn't pay all that much attention to what she did. Why should I? She kept the house spotless. She spoiled me rotten. She raised 3 great kids, and I knew she loved me as much as I loved her. But 3 things just happened in the space of 6 hours that alone would have meant nothing. But taken together, they were screaming something at me. Just to satisfy myself, I called the number she gave me for the hotel, and when the desk clerk answered, I asked him what were the hours on the indoor pool, and I got the answer that I hoped I wouldn't. The last time I had been in that hotel 4 years previous, they didn't have an indoor pool. According to the desk clerk, they still didn't. Couple that with Nora Bethany's "I won't be alone" remark, and a red flag was being raised. The third thing, and the one I really didn't want to think about, was that I was almost positive that I heard someone else breathing heavily in the background while I was talking to her. All of a sudden, I wasn't as sure of my wife as I had always been. I made myself a drink, sat down on the couch, and put my feet up on the hassock, and tried to think of things that might have been an indication that my wife might have strayed on me. I did a lot of deep memory probing and found out that I really didn't know all that much about what went on around our house. I deferred everything to Nora Bethany. She wanted to paint the bathroom a creamy yellow. Yes, dear, whatever you want. Buy a leather sofa for the living room? Of course, dear, whatever you would like. She picked out my shirts, ties, and even my shoes, and I said yes, dear, and kept on doing whatever I was doing. She picked out the house we lived in. She picked our friends. She picked out the places where we went to eat, and she chose the films and TV shows we watched, and I just said yes, dear, and went along with it. Even this weekend that she had planned was all Nora Bethany. She picked the hotel. She decided where we were going to ski, and she even made a list of the runs we would take. She made dinner reservations for each one of the nights we were to stay there. She asked me if the arrangements were all right, and I said, yes, dear, just fine. It hit me that my wife could have been the neighborhood hookup queen, and I wouldn't have had a clue because I never paid enough attention. The next 24 hours were brutal, with all kinds of thoughts messing with my head. Then, at 10 on Friday night, Nora Bethany called and asked how I was doing. Sitting here having bad thoughts. My own fault, of course. If I was there, I wouldn't be here thinking the things I'm thinking, wondering about what I'm wondering about. And what would that be, babe? I wouldn't be sitting here wondering who it is that you were sleeping with while you were up there. There were several moments of silence from her end, and then she said, and just why would you think that? So, I told her about what I'd heard in the background when she called, and then about my call to the hotel. You lied about the pool, heavy breathing in the background, and the comment you let slip about not be alone. 2 and 2 have always equaled 4 to me, Nora Bethany. I can see we will need to have a talk when I get home. I don't see why. Your lack of outrage and lack of indignation over what I have just accused you of say all that needs to be said. Your I won't be alone comment before you even left tells me that you knew I probably wouldn't be going along, and you already had made other arrangements. To me, that means that this probably isn't the first time you have cheated on me, and it probably means that this weekend wasn't really meant for you and me anyway. You set up everything, even your lover. More silence from her end, and I said, your lack of response to that is just as telling. Good night. Nora Bethany and I hung up on her. The phone rang again almost immediately, and it rang several times during the evening, but I ignored it. I was sitting at the kitchen table poring over the list of things I needed to do to keep the project on track when the phone rang. It was Nora Bethany. You hung up on me last night. Didn't have any more that needed to be said. Can't think of anything that needs to be said now, or that I need to listen to now. I've got a project I have to stay on top of, so you just go ahead and enjoy your long weekend with whomever it is you are sharing a bed with. There was a loud sigh of exasperation, and then Nora Bethany said, Walter, you do know that I love you, right? No, I don't know that anymore. If you loved me, truly loved me, this weekend wouldn't have happened. Even then, knowing what I'm thinking, I noticed that you didn't get in your car and race home to try and save your marriage. You can doubt it if you want, but I do love you, Walter, more than you can possibly realize. So please understand that I'm not saying this to hurt you. You could not bother going to work for a month, and it wouldn't affect your job. You could walk into Jared's office and piss in the potted plant in the corner, and all Jared would do is smile at you. I don't understand, Nora Bethany. What are you saying? Walter, you are a regional manager, and you will be Benson's replacement because Jared and I have been having an affair for the last 6 years. Don't let the news upset you, Walter. I love you. I really do. I sat there, phone to my ear, but stunned into silence. 6 years? She had been screwing my boss for 6 years? She had been screwing that son of a bitch for 6 years? I was a regional manager because she was screwing Jared? I hadn't gotten the job because of my hard work? Walter? Walter, are you still there? Yes, dear. We will talk about this when I get home. Yes, dear, whatever you say. I hung up the phone and then I sat there and stared at the wall. I spent the rest of the day stumbling around in a fog. I'd busted my butt for years to climb the corporate ladder only to find out that I didn't have anything to do with my success. I find out that my wife is a cheating 304 and had been for at least the last 6 years. And with Jared, my wife, born and bred in the South, was having an affair with another man. Not just another man, but one who was old enough to be her father. I tried to imagine his big body on top of my small white wife, and the image made me sick to my stomach. All the times he had smiled at me and shaken my hand, he was thinking I'm screwing your wife, stupid, and I smiled back at him and shook his hand. I wondered how it started, but then I realized that it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered now was that it did start. Then I thought, that's 6 years with Jared. How many and for how long before Jared? Hell, if she was doing it while we were married, she was probably doing it while we were going steady and while we were engaged. Then I had a really bad thought. Were my kids really my kids? Obviously, none of them were Jared's, but could one or more be someone else's? 7 that evening, Nora Bethany called again. Are you okay, Walter? Just peachy. Nora Bethany, just peachy. So, tell me, is he with you now like he was the first time you called me? No, Walter, and I'm sorry about that. It was inexcusable of me. He isn't here right now. The reason I called, baby, is to apologize for how I dropped this on you. I should have waited and explained it to you face to face. What's to explain? You pretty much said it all. You let me know that I'm not worth a shit at my job and that the only reason I have one is that you are screwing my boss. Which, by the way, tells me that as far as you are concerned, I'm not worth a shit in bed either. I'd say that pretty much covers it all. It isn't that way, baby. You earned all your promotions. I didn't buy them for you. I just meant to say that you didn't have to worry about your job. As far as your abilities in bed are concerned, I'm perfectly happy with you. I love you, Walter. Honest to God, I do. That doesn't compute, Nora Bethany. If you were perfectly happy with me, why are you screwing Jared? You say that you love me, but how could you have done this to me if you really loved me? This weekend was never about the two of us from the start. It was always going to be for you and Jared. You and Jared both knew how I would respond to the Project and Trouble story. You both knew I wanted Benson's job and that I would leap at the chance to save the day. The two of you played me like a piano, and I made the music you expected me to. You probably would have gotten away with it too if you had slipped up and made that offhand comment about not being alone. You say that you love me? It has been 3 days now, Nora Bethany. 3 days during which you know that I know what is going on up there. But I noticed that you still aren't here trying to find some way to save anything from the mess you made. Goodbye, and I hung up on her. After hanging up on Nora Bethany, the phone started ringing almost every hour on the hour, and the caller ID showed as Aspen area code, so I never bothered answering it. I took the phone off the hook when I went to bed, and when I woke up in the morning, I put the handset back in the cradle, and it rang almost immediately. Caller ID said Aspen again, so I ignored it and went and took my shower. It was still ringing when I left the house for work. I stopped at Denny's for breakfast, and when I got to work, Stella, my secretary, greeted me with, "Your wife has been trying to reach you. She asked me to have you call her at this number as soon as you came in." I took the piece of paper she handed to me and watched her raise her eyebrows as I wadded it up and tossed it in the wastebasket without even looking at it. "No calls from her, Stella. Just tell her I'm out of the office." "I'm sorry, Mr. Hamilton, but I won't lie. I'll take messages, or I'll tell her you told me not to put her calls through. But if you are here, I won't tell her that you aren't." "Thank you, Stella. I needed that." "Needed what, Mr. Hamilton?" "After the weekend I've just had, it is nice to know that there are still honest women around." I took the paperwork on the Trouble Project and ripped it to shreds and dropped it on Jared's desk, and then I went into my office and busied myself with making phone calls. I took everything in me in basket and dumped it into the wastebasket and started cleaning out my desk. At 10, Stella came in. "Your wife has called 4 times, and I've told her that you wouldn't take her calls, and she said fine. Tell him that I'll just have Jared call him. See if he refuses that call." "Could I ask what is going on here?" "It would seem, Stella, that your employer and my wife are upset that I found out they spent the weekend together in Aspen and then had the temerity to get pissed about it. Well, since I won't talk to Jared either, and he is your boss, I guess I need to get you out of the line of fire. You can honestly say that I am out of the office if either of them calls again," and I got up and left. I went home and took the phone off the hook and got busy doing what needed to be done. I didn't go into work at all on Tuesday. At 6 Tuesday evening, I put the phone back on the hook and finished up what I was doing. At 9, I heard a car door slam, and a minute or so later, I heard Nora Bethany holler out, "Honey, I'm home." I didn't answer back and just waited for her to come find me. It was a very awkward moment when she walked into the kitchen followed by Jared. She walked over to me and bent to kiss me and got a very surprised look on her face when I turned my head away. The surprised look turned into a hurt look, and then she said, "Why haven't you been answering the phone, and why wouldn't you take my calls at work?" "Because we don't have anything to say to each other anymore." Obviously, I didn't do a very good job of explaining things. I thought that might be it, so I persuaded Jared to come home with me so we could sit down and talk about this like adults. I almost smiled at that. "Well, yes, I guess that would be good. Being like adults, I mean. Why don't you open a bottle of wine and pour us all a glass so we can relax?" "Yes, dear. What would you like?" "I think we still have a couple of bottles of the Jacob's Creek Merlot left." "Coming right up," I said as I got up and went down to the basement where we kept the wine rack. I took a bottle of the Merlot back to the kitchen, and as I poured the 3 glasses, I was wondering why I hadn't just gotten up, stomped the shit out of Jared, and then tossed the 2 of them out of the house. I think it was because of the everything is fine attitude that Nora Bethany was exhibiting, and I just wanted to see how stupid she thought I really was. I took the wine over to the table and then sat down to see what was going to happen next. Nora Bethany took a sip of her wine, and then she started talking. "First, Walter, you have to understand that my love for you is deep and unconditional. You are my life, and you must believe that. I love you and only you, and I don't want to spend my life with anyone else. That said, I've become attached to Jared in a way that I can't fully explain. I don't love him. I never have, but there's something about him that keeps drawing me back. It's not about emotion. It's purely a physical thing. He means nothing to me otherwise." Then Jared spoke up. "It's true, Walter. I'm in love with Nora Bethany and have been for years. I've begged her to leave you and be with me, but she refuses. She loves you and won't leave. So I take what I can get and try to be happy with that. So, you see, Walter, You have nothing to worry about. I love you and only you. Well, I guess that makes it all better, Walter said sarcastically. So, this is just about some unexplainable attachment and nothing else. Silly me. Here I was worrying for nothing. I'm glad we got that cleared up, baby. Why don't you just go on upstairs to the bedroom while I say goodnight to Jared? I'll be up in a little while, and we can make love. I looked at her and started laughing. I laughed so hard that I had tears in my eyes. I got myself under control, and then I backhanded Jared so hard that he and his chair went backwards onto the floor. He scrambled to get up, and by the time he was on his feet, I was standing in front of him, and I smashed him in the mouth 3 times and he went back down. I kicked him 3 times hard in the crotch, and then I leaned down, grabbed his shirt front, and pulled his face up to within inches of mine. Consider that my resignation, you son of a bitch. And then I slammed his head back down on the floor and headed for the door. Where are you going? Asked Nora Bethany. I'm going home. Home? You are home. No, I'm not. When I found out what you were doing, my first thought was to throw your cheating butt out on the street. Then I thought of all the memories of you that the house would keep pushing at me, and I decided that I would be the one to get out. I rented an apartment Monday, and I spent yesterday moving into it. That's my home now. Don't do this to me, Walter. I love you. You know I do. I don't want you to leave me. Please, Walter, I don't want to lose you. You should have thought of that before you decided to get involved with Jared. And while we're on the subject, Nora Bethany, even if I believed your excuse about being addicted to him, there had to be a first time with Jared when you didn't yet know all the things you claim to now. Were you still my loving wife then? Was I still the one you wanted to be with when you were with him the first time? Were you concerned about losing me then, Nora Bethany? I turned and walked out the door while she kept crying out for me not to go. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Be prepared served as the Boy Scouts' motto. The Scout Code varied, outlining that a Boy Scout should embody traits like reliability, loyalty, helpfulness, friendliness, politeness, kindness, obedience, cheerfulness, thriftiness, bravery, cleanliness, and respectfulness. Surprisingly, it also mentioned naivety, apparent stupidity, idiocy, and trust. Nick had no alternative explanations. Typically, after checking his wife's iPhone email, he refrained from further exploration, a habit she knew well, thus foregoing extra security measures. Being a Boy Scout, he respected others' privacy. However, with Nick's wife departing in a few weeks, he struggled to recall her hotel's name, despite her prior mention, hoping to avoid arguments about his inattentiveness, which had become more frequent. Their impending separation would be their longest since their wedding 5 years ago. Nick contemplated a romantic gesture, like sending flowers to express his affection while she was thousands of miles away in the city of love, Paris. Yet, he knew her affections in Paris would be for Dwayne, her companion on the trip. Upon entering his wife's phone password, their wedding date, Nick found himself perusing one of the non-work-related emails exchanged between Linda and Dwayne over recent weeks. They discussed romantic activities in Paris, including strolls along the Champs-Élysées, moonlit boat rides on the Seine, and passionate nights. Almost as startling as the affair itself was the fact that Linda and Dwayne exchanged messages using their work email accounts. They both should have exercised better judgment. Like Nick, Linda was a lawyer, and Dwayne was a paralegal at her firm. All three had extensive experience in document analysis for major litigation cases, where teams of lawyers and paralegals combed through hundreds of thousands of emails for discovery proceedings. Typically, the narrative revolved around 1 or 2 individuals engaging in affairs, prompting lawyers to assess any impact on the case and strategize damage control. The truth was, Nick's lack of attention when Linda mentioned the trip and hotel name stemmed from a sense of something amiss, honed by his legal experience in detecting deception. He couldn't pinpoint it then, but his instincts signaled trouble. 5 years as a lawyer, listening to clients and colleagues had sharpened his perception. Something felt off when Linda first mentioned the trip. The arbitration process ahead promised to be dreadfully dull, leaving no time to enjoy the sights of Paris. She mentioned this casually, without even looking at him, and it felt too dismissive. Knowing Paris held a special place in Nick's heart, they often discussed visiting together since Linda had never been. Nick found her response odd, but he didn't anticipate such a dire situation. The email he was now reading felt like a sharp blow to his heart. Dwayne's message from the previous night suggested removing Nick to spend more time together without worry. Linda replied, stating she felt safe with Nick, but admitted to enjoying secret moments with Dwayne. This revelation stung. Nick felt uncertain about his next steps. aside from forwarding all correspondence to himself and printing out the email exchange as evidence, just in case. As an experienced lawyer, his first instinct was to preserve evidence. After securing the emails, Nick began to contemplate his options. He knew he needed to think carefully before taking any action. This analytical approach was what defined him as a lawyer. He was paid for his intellect, not his physical strength. With Linda out for a run and expected back soon, he had limited time to make decisions. Before he could consider his next move, he needed to complete the task of finding a hotel. However, this wasn't for sending flowers. He didn't understand why he needed this information, but he knew it was necessary, perhaps to be near the Eiffel Tower, close to the International Chamber of Commerce, where Linda and Dwayne would be working on their arbitration case. Once he located a suitable hotel, Nick quickly conducted a search on Virginia divorce law. While he remembered some details from the bar exam, he wanted to double-check. Infidelity was grounds for divorce and could impact issues such as alimony and property division. But there were nuances to consider. One defense was if Linda discovered the infidelity and then resumed carnal relations voluntarily. Nick needed to leave the house quickly, avoiding confrontation for now, intending to confront Linda later with a carefully crafted response. He resolved to take control of the situation for the remainder of their marriage, even if it meant acting against the principles of the Boy Scouts. In wartime, as Churchill famously said, truth must be protected by a bodyguard of lies. Nick's lies would serve a greater purpose now, especially since none of them were under oath. He headed to the master bedroom, beginning to pack swiftly. Finishing promptly, he placed his suitcases near the front door. He nearly completed gathering vital documents, bank and credit card statements, 401k and IRA statements, car titles, pay stubs, mortgage, and Linda's recent student loan balance. As he emerged from his basement office, he heard her in the kitchen, deciding to appear worn out and disheveled when facing his wife. With her shoulder-length brown hair pulled back into a ponytail, she looked attractive, though he found her repulsive. In his view, love was already dead. "I'll be going to Paris," he announced with a grim smile. Linda's face drained of color, her blue eyes losing their brightness. "What, Paris, Virginia?" Her initial shock faded quickly. "Sven just called," Nick explained. "We're needed for an insurance case, and we need to prep a witness. We lost the motion to compel, and the judge is furious, throwing the investigation timeline into chaos. I'll be on the road for a few weeks, though I might drop by occasionally." "Poor thing," Linda replied with a fitting expression of concern. "Maybe your company is hiring." "I'd rather join you in Paris," Nick countered, noting concern flicker across her face again. But then she grinned. "Send me your resume. Maybe you have the right experience for us to consider." It was a jest. Linda's law firm ranked higher than Nick's. Perhaps with some guilt, she moved as if to hug him, but Nick retreated to his office before she could close the gap. Visions of striking her resurfaced, and he wasn't sure he could keep them at bay. Heading back upstairs, Linda inquired about his dinner preference. "I won't be able to stay. I'll grab something on my way out. Sven urgently needs me to hit the road," he said, bustling around the kitchen. Linda followed him to the door, a hint of concern in her expression as he grabbed his suitcases and headed out. She leaned in for a goodbye kiss. "Apologies. I think I may have caught a cold this morning. My throat feels sore. It could be allergies, but I don't want you to catch anything." Linda trailed him to the car as he loaded it. "When can I expect you back?" "Probably not until Friday. We're heading to Roanoke after Paris. Then, the following week, we're off to Baltimore." Perhaps growing more paranoid, he thought he could discern the gears turning in her mind as he watched her avert her gaze, as though contemplating how his absence might present unexpected opportunities for her. Waving goodbye, he reversed out of the driveway. He hoped she would simply assume that he was preoccupied with work and irritated by the Saturday call. His acting skills were already stretched thin, but he suspected she was already plotting to invite Dwayne over. Nick drove until he reached a nearby shopping center with a coffee shop. Like many lawyers, he found clarity in putting thoughts to paper. As he finished his coffee, he began jotting down a list of tasks. Pausing for a moment, he realized he had never entertained the idea of reconciliation. That wasn't even on the table. Only retribution was. The question was, to what extent? The ringing of his phone interrupted him. Not recognizing the number, he answered impatiently. "Yes," he said. "Mr. Buford, I'm Sam Granger. Though we haven't met, I'll be direct. I found your number online. I specialize in buying old houses and replacing them with mansions. I understand it's controversial, but people tend to soften when presented with a check." Granger spoke rapidly. leaving Nick little time to react except to note that the house wasn't old. It was cozy. "I'd like to purchase your house to demolish it," Granger continued. "While I'd suggest a shopping center, construction timelines, especially with county permits, are unpredictable. I make my profit by closing deals fast, and I believe I can offer you a very favorable price if you and your wife are interested in selling." Nick struggled to suppress a grin reminiscent of the Grinches as Linda picked out their home shortly before their wedding. Although an aged ranch, it boasted a charming yard bordering a wooded area with a babbling creek. Despite its proximity to major highways, it offered seclusion and tranquility. What truly sold her was the treehouse in the yard opposite the master bedroom window, envisioning it as an ideal space for children. Meanwhile, Nick was drawn to its affordability and the fact that it was only a 20-minute drive from the main subway parking lot, coupled with a 30-minute train ride to work, making the move to the area highly convenient. "Mr. Granger, I'll be absent for the next few days, so access to the property may not be guaranteed. Call me, Sam. I don't require an interior inspection. As mentioned, it's a wreck, and I've already surveyed the exterior. Can we meet Sunday morning?" "Certainly. I'll likely finalize the deal using my wife's power of attorney due to her busy work schedule." "No problem. I'll provide you with the necessary paperwork." Nick made a note of the address and started to envision the plan taking shape. Did Linda feel secure with her Boy Scout? Little did she know that Lord Baden-Powell's scouting principles, stealth, cunning, and self-confidence, served as the basis for his boy's movement skills, akin to military intelligence tactics, including ambushes. She won't anticipate what unfolds until it's too late. But first, reconnaissance. To start, he set his empty coffee cup on the table and headed to the car for privacy. Dialing a number, he asked, "Frank?" when the call was picked up. Frank Barry worked as a private detective during his 5 years in corporate legal work. Nick also made it a priority to do pro bono work to assist disadvantaged individuals with their legal issues. This aligned with his beliefs about leading a meaningful life and provided him with courtroom experience that his regular job typically didn't offer. One of his law school peers suggested that Frank assist with a contentious divorce case involving a stepfather accused of carnally abusing his stepdaughter. Frank's evidence led to the man's release when the police's lackluster response failed, expediting the divorce process. As Nick briefed Frank on what he had uncovered, he queried, "You think your wife will bring him to our bed tonight? Is she truly that arrogant?" "She's become incredibly arrogant, a standout in her law school class. She believes she's infallible. I'll handle it myself. I owe you for your help. The Rivera divorce case brought me significant positive attention. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Thanks, Frank." Nick added, "Oh, and there's a treehouse in the backyard that you might find useful. Its windows directly face the master bedroom, and she tends to keep the curtains open. It used to bother me, but I've learned to accept whatever arouses her. You can access it by crossing the forest and jumping over the stream after dark. There are no fences or dogs around. A service road on the other side offers parking." "Thank you. If it's okay, I plan to conceal a camera outdoors, aiming it at the front of the house to monitor arrivals and departures." "Excellent. And you're engaging Harry for a divorce, correct? You're seeking a divorce?" "Yes, and yes." "All right, I know Harry's fondness for affidavits and the reporting process. If you're correct, we'll discover the truth soon." Next, Nick phoned Harry. "Is this regarding the law school reunion?" "Nick, I've already received 5 calls about contributing to their fund. No, I need to retain your services. Linda's been unfaithful and I want to pursue legal action." After briefing him, Harry replied, "Come by tomorrow. Although it's Sunday, I still needed to handle some paperwork at the office. We might as well proceed. It seems you've acknowledged that infidelity cannot be tolerated. Frank has already gathered compelling evidence of the affair. The challenge will be negotiating a fair financial settlement. She's also a lawyer at a prominent firm, so she'll have the means to contest and delay. Additionally, colleagues at her firm are advising her. Leave it to me," Nick said. "I believe we can resolve this in a civilized manner." "So, you're not planning to go all out against her, but understood. Let's see what you propose." His final call required finesse. "Hello, Maggie. It's Nick." The silence on the other end was profound. "Maggie, it's good to hear from you too, honey. After all these years. What's on your mind, Nick? After all this time, I need your assistance. I thought Linda was your assistant. It's about Linda. She's been up to no good." What a shock. I find it hard to believe. Foolish. Have you noticed that all of this is encapsulated in quotation marks? I can't offer you emotional or carnal support lately. I'm seeing someone else now, and I'm sure he's content. Look, I truly apologize. I regret that our indiscretions tainted our friendship. I also regret allowing Linda to push you out of my life when there was a chance for us to reconcile. But now I need your supportive assistance." "What do you need, Nick?" he informed her. There was a pause on the line, followed by laughter. "I'm in," she said once she had composed herself, though he could still sense the grin in her voice. "You always knew how to make me laugh." "Thank you, Maggie. Once things settle down, you'll have to introduce me to Mr. Lucky so I can commend him on his excellent choice and invite you both to dinner." "Consider it arranged," she replied. He required a place to lay low for a while and strategize. Thus, he booked a room at an extended stay hotel outside the Beltway in Fairfax, distant enough from his and Linda's usual hangouts to avoid detection. After settling in, he went out to grab a bite to eat. Although he wasn't particularly hungry, he knew he needed sustenance in his stomach to handle the drinks he intended to consume. Across the street from the hotel stood a restaurant named El Mariachi. As the hostess seated him in a booth, he noticed the bartender glancing in his direction. The bartender seemed vaguely familiar, but Nick dismissed the thought. At present, he had ample reasons to be concerned. The menu items suggested that the restaurant masqueraded as Mexican cuisine. Many Americans couldn't discern the distinction. He opted for budget-friendly tequila with his meal, anticipating a harsh hangover the next day, considering the discomfort part of the purging process. The waitress returned with a bottle of premium tequila from the top shelf. Catching Nick's gaze, she gestured to the bartender, who nodded in acknowledgement. Nick reciprocated the gesture and poured himself a generous drink. As the bartender resumed tending to other patrons, it took a moment for Nick to recall his identity. He remembered him as one of the spectators at Rivera's divorce trial and the subsequent criminal proceedings, always seated alone in the back row. One day, his client's daughter, Sonia, hugged him, but when Nick inquired about the man, Sonia grew silent, insisting he was just a family friend. Nick dined quietly, jotting notes on a notepad and sipping tequila. After the waitress cleared his table, he visited the restroom, feeling the surroundings sway as if he were aboard a ship. Leaning against the wall for support, he returned to his booth, attempting to maintain composure, only to find the bartender seated across from him. "Senor Nick, good to see you," he greeted, clasping Nick's hand and shaking it vigorously. Nick settled in, awaiting his words. "I never properly thanked you for helping my cousin deal with that scoundrel she was wedded to." Nick tried to downplay his role, but the bartender brushed it off. "He was severely injured in prison. Were you aware?" "I was. They fear he may never walk or eat solid food again." The bartender's slight smile sent a shiver down Nick's spine. "I didn't catch that," Nick remarked. The bartender shrugged. "Yesterday's news. What brings you to El Mariachi solo on a Saturday night? Where's your lovely wife?" Nick met the bartender's gaze. The bartender maintained a smile, not mocking, but knowing. Nick wondered why he posed such an odd question. How did he even know Nick was married? Then, Nick recalled Linda's surprise visit to one of the hearings, where she kissed him afterward. The bartender must have still been in the courtroom. "We're dealing with some issues regarding her," Nick admitted. He saw no need to fabricate or conceal details, such as her involvement with someone else, again met with the bartender's knowing smile. Nick was taken aback and fell silent. "I'm no lawyer, Don Nicholas, but I know that if you want to keep a secret, you shouldn't write it down and leave the paper lying around," the bartender remarked, gesturing to Nick's notebook. It detailed aspects of infidelity, depicted drawings of Dwayne's hypothetical demise, featured the name Linda encircled with a slash, and included a to-do list with the phrase, "burn the bitch." Nick shrugged. Poor operational security, but at least it didn't expose any sensitive customer data. Any man in your predicament should ponder his desires. What do you truly desire, Senor Nick? Apart from wealth, what would be your ultimate vengeance? Nick didn't hesitate. "I want to punch her nose so hard it shatters, and I want to strike her face until both her eyes blacken. She has a stunning face and expressive eyes. I want to obliterate them." The bartender's grin widened, followed by a chuckle and a shake of his head. "My friend, your thinking isn't rational. Those who seek revenge so viciously often end up behind bars. You wouldn't want that. Unless, of course, it happens while you're visiting your clients, right?" He paused, casting a sly glance at Nick, who nodded. "But perhaps I can assist you with something. You aided my cousin with her predicament. She could have sought my help, but for various reasons, she declined. Yet you stepped in and handled it." Nick attempted to interject. Yes, he enlisted Frank to gather evidence, but he left the police to do the legwork. Nick also enlisted a partner from his firm, a a former assistant United States attorney, to diplomatically liaise with the prosecutor to ensure proper handling of the criminal case. Nick accompanied his client to ensure she received due respect from the prosecutor. The divorce itself was standard procedure following her husband's conviction. The bartender waved off his objections. "You must recognize that aiding everyday people like my cousin is commendable. On behalf of my family, I am indebted to you. I always repay my debts. I believe you could use some assistance." Nick studied him intently. "I'm afraid I don't recall your name." The bartender's smile morphed into a shark-like grin. "Some folks call me El Diablo, Devil." He nodded. "That's what those who dislike me call me. To my friends, I'm Jose Garcia." Now it was Nick's moment to grin. "What must I do to earn a favor from the devil? Trade my soul?" El Diablo's grin faded. Nick's expression turned serious. "Let's be real. You're a lawyer. You don't have a soul." His grin returned, signaling a jest. "Consider it professional courtesy, Senor Nick. Now just provide me with your address, your wife's name, and her daily routine." "What's your plan?" "I have a few ideas, but ever heard the saying, ignorance is bliss? I think you need to remain blissfully unaware and keep track of your whereabouts over the coming months. Get yourself a disposable phone so we can stay connected. Leave the number here at the bar, and after that, steer clear of this place. It's for the best." Nick briefed El Diablo on hiring a private investigator, his intention to stay put until Linda jetted off to France, and her travel schedule. El Diablo recognized the hotel in Paris but kept its source under wraps. "Just one query, Senor Nick. Is there any hope for reconciliation, forgiveness, mercy? I don't want to hear, 'I've had a change of heart' later on." El Diablo met his gaze squarely. The grin vanished. His demeanor turned grave. Nick held his gaze, took a deep breath, and paused to rein in his emotions. The path ahead was clear. He was a man of simple values, prioritizing trust and loyalty above all else. They had left his marriage. Linda had flicked a switch in his mind, swapping love for loathing. With time and reflection, he knew he'd eventually become indifferent, but that time hadn't arrived yet. "No one," El Diablo eased. "All right, don't stress about a thing." The waitress delivered the bill. El Diablo waved her off, but permitted Nick to tip generously. He also allowed Nick to take a bottle of tequila, but cautioned him to pace himself. A clear mind was essential for the upcoming battle. Somehow, Nick woke up on Sunday morning at a reasonable hour with minimal hangover. He reached Harry's law office at 10 a.m. and found Frank already present. "Apologies, Nick," Frank said. "She definitely had relations with that guy in your bed. He was there 2 hours after you called me and was still present when I departed. This morning we received high-quality footage. I've made you a copy, but you might not want to view it." Harry interjected, "You probably shouldn't." "Don't worry," Nick replied, accepting the DVD from Frank. "Give me the summary." Frank continued, "I climbed into that treehouse just like you instructed, and they were all over each other. I captured clear shots of their faces, and frankly, their entire bodies. It was evident they were engaging in relations. Nonetheless, it seems to be merely physical. They hardly conversed. I'm uncertain if this alters your plans." "No, for how long?" Nick inquired. "They both had remarkable stamina." "Thank you. This only makes me feel worse. Apologies. Anyway, I'm personally acquainted with Linda from your party last year, so I can identify her. We ran a check on this guy's license plates. They belong to Dwayne Martin. We know he's colluding with her. The duration of their involvement remains unclear, but it appears to be compelling evidence. Oh, and we've installed a camera in a nearby tree overlooking the driveway and garage, allowing us to monitor their comings and goings. I'll send you a remote link to the live stream on our secure server. I've discussed this with Harry, and we'll draft a report and supporting affidavit for him to file. Once again, my apologies, dude." Frank exchanged handshakes with Harry and Nick before departing the office. "So, what's the plan?" inquired Harry. "We're filing for divorce on grounds of infidelity, but I don't want to serve her yet," Nick explained. Harry regarded Nick stoically. "Trust me, Harry, those words make my stomach churn. I don't want any foolish moves. I have a feeling things will go smoother than you think," Nick reassured. Harry winced. "Just file this on Monday afternoon before the court office closes. Give me the case number, and I'll handle the rest. But remember, Nick, I'm not versed in criminal law." "Noted. And if you find yourself in trouble, I can't bail you out." "You might be pleasantly surprised," Nick quipped as he exited. His next destination was a meeting with Sam Granger. It proved highly productive, as Nick discovered they could sell the house for over $100,000 more than the mortgage, without real estate agent fees. Linda would be thrilled if she knew. Nick pledged to return promptly with the necessary paperwork to seal the deal. As Nick left Sam's office, he glanced at his phone. No messages or calls. She must still be occupied with Dwayne. Nick seized the moment to call his boss, Sven, and inform him of his urgent need for 2 weeks of vacation, or he would resign. Sven, in a panic, relented, recognizing Nick's vital role in current affairs and their temporary business slowdown. With his plans set in motion, Nick returned to his hotel to tend to his ongoing tasks. By Monday evening, everything was prepared. Linda had left voicemails on Sunday and Monday evenings, to which he chose not to respond, reserving his energy for Tuesday morning. Frank's camera positioned outside the house had provided Nick with insights. Dwayne had spent Monday night there, and based on his prior stay from Sunday evening to Monday morning, he would likely depart around 8 a.m. for work, just before Linda left around 8:30 a.m. At 7 o'clock sharp, Nick strolled through the front door and exclaimed, "Darling, I'm home!" A sudden noise from upstairs caught his attention, and shortly after, Linda descended the stairs in her robe, appearing disheveled and startled. "Honey, what a surprise," she said, attempting to feign cheerfulness but struggling to conceal her unease on the brink of panic. "I thought you wouldn't be here until Friday. You didn't answer my calls." "Apologies," Nick replied cheerfully. "You know how it goes." He pretended not to notice the 2 glasses of wine left in the living room as he made his way to the dining room. Linda lingered in the doorway, pondering her next move and how to prevent him from ascending the stairs, where Dwayne was likely hiding. A knock at the door startled her. "Could you get that, honey?" Nick requested. Meanwhile, he busied himself arranging papers on the dining room table, feigning obliviousness as Linda squared her shoulders and went to answer the door, possibly anticipating the arrival of a bailiff with divorce papers. To her surprise, it was Maggie who entered unannounced, simply greeting them. Linda observed with intrigue as Maggie took a seat at the dining table and opened her suitcase. "Apologies, honey," Nick began, "but I'm uncertain when my next on-air appearance will be. And you know, I can't imagine you embarking on a foreign trip without updating your powers of attorney. You know, just as a precaution in case any financial or medical emergencies arise. Oh, and I had a couple of moments over the weekend and received a tip about refinancing my mortgage at a fantastic rate. Since we'll both be traveling, I thought now would be the opportune time to handle it. I apologize for the urgency," he added, attempting to convey his remorse. "Who's this?" Linda inquired, gesturing towards Maggie once the pulsing in her temples had subsided. "This is Maggie," Nick clarified. Linda visibly relaxed. "Maggie is a notary," Nick elaborated. "You're my Boy Scout, always prepared," she remarked with a grin as she took a seat, though her eyes remained cautious. "It's just my nature, honey," he said, handing Linda a pen and arranging the papers in front of her. "The flags with arrows indicate where to sign. Feel free to review the documents if you wish." "I trust you," Linda replied with a broad smile, promptly signing all the papers before her. Nick silently prayed that she would comply, as his fate depended on it. But as they say, fortune favors the bold. As Linda signed each document, Nick passed them to Maggie, who notarized them. "Mrs. Buford, do you have a photo ID?" Maggie inquired. Linda rose from the table to retrieve her purse. A brief exchange of glances occurred between Maggie and Nick, both struggling to suppress laughter. Linda placed her driver's license on the table. Maggie snapped a photo with her phone and recorded the details in her notary journal. Linda offered coffee, but both Nick and Maggie politely declined. As Maggie finalized the certification of the documents in her ledger, and Nick organized everything into separate folders, Linda's gaze remained expectant, anticipating Nick's next move. Strategizing her next steps, Maggie departed, tidying up her belongings and offering Nick a smile when Linda's attention was elsewhere. Seizing the moment, Nick informed Linda that he had a conference call to conduct and retreated to his basement office to do so. Linda visibly relaxed, knowing she now had time to discreetly escort Dwayne out and erase any trace of him before Nick resurfaced from his sanctuary. Nick descended to the basement, allowing Linda to maintain the illusion that she was still deceiving him. Pretending not to hear the heavy footsteps retreating up the stairs as Dwayne made his escape, or the garage door opening for Dwayne's departure, Nick continued with his charade. However, upon hearing the shower running in the master bathroom, Nick swiftly gathered his belongings, exited through the basement door, and drove off in silence, leaving his unsuspecting wife behind. 2 hours later, after a hearty breakfast at the diner, Nick found himself in Harry's office. Harry appeared taken aback. So you're saying you had your wife sign Form CC 1106, confirming the divorce filing and relinquishing future service of process and notice of any proceedings? That's correct. The properly certified form is right here. And you're also telling me that you coerced your wife, a seasoned lawyer, into signing a property settlement agreement transferring all proceeds from the sale of your home and its contents, along with cars and any jewelry she owns, granting you full control over her personal belongings, and allowing both of you to retain your respective retirement accounts, with no alimony from you to her, despite her higher income. Indeed, she always displayed a very generous demeanor. Harry scrutinized Nick and redirected his focus to the papers on his desk. And you also procured her signature on an affidavit wherein she confesses to infidelity, acknowledging her lover's presence in the marital bedroom at the time of signing, following a night of closeness the previous evening. Are you suggesting her affidavit genuinely supports this account? According to the email, she mentioned staying with her lover due to his proficiency. Is this the narrative you wish to present, counselor? Nick maintained a neutral expression, struggling to contain his emotions. Let's refrain from insults. The documents are self-explanatory. Harry glanced at the papers, then at Nick, almost smiling before suppressing it and swiveling in his chair. Damn it. I'll accept the case. You're a respected member of the bar and an old friend from law school. How was I to know you orchestrated all this? I thought it was legitimate. Your Honor, I'm utterly bewildered. I was blindsided by my client's breach of trust. If anyone's license should be revoked, it's Nicholas A. Buford's, Your Honor. Do you see my stance on this, Nick? I'll pursue it to the bitter end if need be. Will the notary affirm Linda's signature on these documents? Yes, she will. Can she testify to Linda's careful review of the papers? I wouldn't wish to preempt or sway any testimony, but given Linda's legal expertise, I trust she scrutinized the documents diligently. I'm confident the notary will attest to witnessing Linda Buford review and sign each document. As for her comprehension of their contents, I cannot offer an opinion. All right then, said Harry. I'll process all this today, along with Frank's affidavit and report, complete with photos and a DVD. I'll attempt to remove it from the electronic record temporarily. We don't want this to remain in the public eye, do we? No, replied Nick. Linda's departing for Paris in just over 2 weeks. The longer we keep it concealed, the better. Do you have any connections in district court? Remember Seth? Asked Harry. He was a student a year junior to us. Struggling to secure a position at a law firm, he's now serving as a law clerk in district court to bolster his resume. He could expedite the process, but if the judge insists on live testimony, it could jeopardize everything. Linda must decide not to contest this for some reason, should she become aware. If things take a turn for the worse, I may need to resign as your attorney. Fair enough. Someday you can fill me in on the whole ordeal, but not now. Over the subsequent 2 weeks, Nick kept Linda at a distance. He sent her texts at irregular intervals, citing his busy schedule, and only sporadically answered her calls. As time passed, her calls dwindled. You've spooked her, Frank informed him by week's end. According to our surveillance footage, Dwayne hasn't been at the house since you surprised them on Tuesday morning. I can't ascertain if they rendezvous at his place during the week or engage in their activities at the office, but it's evident they're avoiding home. I'll keep you posted if anything changes. The only alteration was Nick's discreet return to the house upon learning Linda had departed to gather the financial documents he deemed necessary. He also finalized a contract with Sam Granger to sell the house, with the sale set to close during Linda's initial week in France. During evenings, Nick frequented the gym, read in his spare time, and pondered how he ended up with such a chaotic life at 30. He informed Sven of his need for a few more weeks of rest, to which Sven reluctantly agreed. She's back to enjoying herself with him in the house, Frank informed him on Saturday, a week before Linda's Paris trip. Thanks for the heads up, Nick replied. Though indifferent, he knew he'd rather incinerate the sheets than sell them when he abandoned the house. By then, Nick had already viewed the video Frank provided, revealing Dwayne's allure. Dwayne, a few years younger, was a gym regular known for pre-weight training mirror rituals. Otherwise unremarkable, Dwayne embodied a superficial ideal Nick could have done without. Before he knew it, Linda embarked on her long-awaited Paris trip. One of Frank's associates shadowed her to the airport, waiting until her departure for Europe. Upon receiving the news, Nick entered the house, consolidated Linda's clothes in the living room, and packed his belongings. The next day, movers boxed Linda's clothing and sent it to storage, while Nick's possessions were moved to the apartment he secured. With Sam Granger's assistance, a proficient house liquidator, Nick easily sold the furniture. Once the house was emptied, Nick took a final stroll before executing his ultimate task. He meticulously gathered the wedding photographs, album, and Linda's wedding dress, placing them in the patio fire pit beneath the treehouse. After adding lighter fluid and igniting a match, he watched as the memories turned to ashes. After the blaze, Nick was satisfied to find that the video captured ample detail. Each photo added to the pit depicted vivid memories of their time together. The following day, Nick finalized the sale of their family home using his wife's power of attorney, which she should have reviewed. With a separate financial power of attorney, Nick managed to deposit the sale proceeds, access his personal account, acting on behalf of his wife, and close joint accounts 3 days later. However, during Linda's initial week in France, a construction crew demolished the house, clearing debris swiftly before commencing site preparation. Unfortunately, the tree, once a playground favorite for children, had to be removed. A gazebo now stood in its place. Regrettably, construction halted abruptly as the cherished home site transitioned into an empty square of land. It appeared there were issues with the permitting process. Nick and a law school friend employed in the county permitting department were confident the issue would resolve upon Linda's return from France, once the appropriate forms were received and approved. Throughout this period, Nick ignored all attempts at communication from Linda, eschewing calls, texts, emails, and voicemails, despite outreach from her friends and relatives. Nick replied swiftly, informing them he was occupied and traveling, primarily to deter them from driving by the house and encountering him. El Diablo reached out on Nick's prepaid cell phone, mentioning that Linda and Dwayne appeared strained and unhealthy, hinting at possible suspicions. When Nick inquired how he obtained this information, El Diablo simply stated his wide network of connections, even across Europe. He then proposed returning Linda's wedding and engagement rings, to which Nick declined. El Diablo asked if someone else could purchase them, to which Nick adamantly refused, but eventually relented, suggesting he might know a potential buyer. 2 days before Linda's scheduled return from Paris, Nick found himself in Harry's office. "I have no idea how this happened, but here's the divorce decree. It's much quicker than usual for such cases," Harry remarked, with Seth remaining silent. "I don't inquire or speculate. Consider yourself fortunate and celebrate your newfound single status. Here's the copy I'll be sending to your ex-wife. I'm sure she'll be pleased." As Nick approached his car outside Harry's office, an unfamiliar number rang his phone. However, upon answering, he recognized El Diablo's voice. "Nick, you should take a vacation immediately. Go somewhere crowded where people know you and can vouch for your presence." With that, El Diablo disconnected the call. Nick realized it had been ages since he saw his college friends in New York. Fortunately, his schedule was open for the next few days, so he embarked on a trip the same day. He visited several exhibitions, explored numerous museums, and socialized over lunches, coffees, and dinners with different groups of friends, covering most expenses with his credit card. He also tipped generously at his hotel to ensure recognition from all the staff. While there, he express mailed a DVD copy depicting him burning Linda's wedding dress and album to her parents' house. Late Sunday evening, after savoring coffee and pastries in Little Italy and Manhattan, Nick's phone rang. It was his father-in-law. "Nick, where are you? Linda is in a frenzy. She's in the hospital?" "Yes, what's the matter?" This was becoming intriguing. She returned from her trip on Friday, but she and her colleague were apparently abducted from the airport. They emerged this morning, both under the influence of medications. Her colleague was severely smacking, and Linda... Here, his father-in-law's voice faltered. "What about Linda?" "She woke up covered in tattoos from head to toe, tattoos with dreadful inscriptions, and as soon as she woke and saw this, a masked man entered and struck her nose, breaking it. Then he inflicted 2 black eyes with 2 more blows." Impressive, Nick pondered. It was the perfect ending. He wouldn't mind if Linda realized his betrayal, just as she betrayed him in their marriage. It would be worth a soul if he possessed one. "I'm sorry to hear that. I'm out of town presently. What do you need me to do?" Nick sensed surprise on the other end of the line. "You're her husband. She's your wife." "Not anymore. We divorced. The court finalized it last week. She's cheating on me with the man she's traveling with." "What? How? Here? What's unclear?" Nick knew he was being excessively cruel now, but he didn't care. "I have a video. I can send you a copy of her engaging in bed acts. Not with me, if you'd like to know." Silence followed on the other end. Nick wondered if his father-in-law had suffered a heart attack. "We're done with her, so you'll have to bring her home. She's not my responsibility now." "You did it," his father-in-law exclaimed. I've been in New York since Wednesday, celebrating my divorce. Look, I understand you're upset, and I hope Linda recovers soon, but I don't think we have anything else to say to each other." He ended the call. At that instant, Nick realized the urban stress had become overwhelming. He emailed Sven, bluntly stating that he and the firm could go to hell. Respectfully, a quick online search revealed an REI store in Soho, prompting Nick to equip himself with new hiking and camping gear. Since Linda never enjoyed hiking, this was an opportunity for Nick to reconnect with his intelligence background. The hotel kindly stored his luggage for a reasonable fee, allowing him to venture into the Adirondack Mountains to immerse himself in nature until things settled down. Fortunately, he had his passport in case he decided to visit Canada. As it turned out, he did. For the next 8 weeks, Nick mostly ignored his phone. Initially, the barrage of messages, resembling frantic screams and tears, made it seem like someone had hijacked his ex-wife's phone. Unable to sift through them all, he listened to only a couple before deleting the rest, along with numerous bizarre emails. Clearly, her account must have been compromised. Finding time to read through it all seemed impossible. Nick hoped the troubled woman behind the messages would seek the help she urgently needed. 8 weeks later, Nick met Frank and Harry for drinks. "Just to clarify," Harry began once they were settled, "I terminated our attorney-client relationship right after I provided you with the divorce decree. I notified you via registered mail. Perhaps you haven't checked your email yet?" Nick admitted he hadn't. "It's quite a storm, buddy," remarked Harry. Frank added, "More like a typhoon, I'm all for it. Plenty of havoc." Harry finished his bourbon and ordered another. Frank began detailing the events. "So, on Monday morning, the former Mrs. Buford arrived at her previous residence with her parents. We never got around to removing the external camera. Upon seeing the empty lot, she experienced a complete breakdown, falling to her knees in tears and assuming the fetal position. It culminated in her kicking and screaming like a toddler at the mall by late afternoon. Later, when a work crew arrived, she had another outburst, despite having raccoon eyes from the slapings and a Band-Aid on her broken nose." Harry then took up the narrative. "That afternoon, she, along with a couple of attorneys from her prestigious firm, stormed into my humble office in a threatening manner. Since they had no appointment, I kept them waiting for 25 minutes. I ensured my Glock was loaded and placed on my desk. Thank goodness for Virginia laws. After the wait, they all yelled at me, discussing urgent motions, bar complaints, and contempt proceedings. I must confess, it was hard not to notice the tattoos all over her face, vividly inked in red and blue for visibility. Once I managed to regain focus," Harry continued, "I inquired about the exact issue causing their aggression, asking if there were any false statements. They paused, exchanging glances. So I questioned them about the controversy surrounding your ex-wife's alleged infidelity. They all affirmed it. I then played a video I had prepared while they waited for Mrs. Buford, showing her engaging in bed activity with someone other than her husband in the marital bed. Clearly, they hadn't thoroughly reviewed the entire case file yet," Harry continued. "Then they all just appeared perplexed. Linda started screaming that you didn't even give her a chance to explain herself, and I responded saying you weren't concerned about the reason, you just took action. She regained composure and began arguing that she never consented to you selling the house. She questioned the rationale behind burning her wedding dress, photos, and albums, as they were her personal belongings. I presented her with copies of the powers of attorney, one specifically granting authorization to sell the house. I showed her the property settlement agreement, granting you discretion to dispose of her personal belongings, and reminded her she was fortunate to retain her clothing. I inquired whether she disputed her signature on the documents. While she admitted it was hers, she insisted she hadn't agreed to the contents. Then I questioned if her defense rested on her failure to read what she signed. I prompted her to envision the scrutiny during cross-examination if she challenged anything in court. She fell silent at this point. I also referenced the affidavit she signed, acknowledging her lover's presence upstairs at the time of signing, and asked if this was accurate. She then lost consciousness. Her companions attempted to revive her, but I had already dialed emergency. Despite their insistence, she refused to accompany them to the hospital. However, she began shouting about tattoos and her boyfriend being assaulted, Harry added. I clarified that these matters were unrelated to you. As far as I knew, you were out of town anyway. I suggested that perhaps Dwayne had provoked a husband, either of another woman he was involved with or someone who felt Linda was taking him away. I informed them they could address any potential criminal case with the Fairfax Police Department. Then things took an interesting turn, Harry continued. They persisted in discussing filing a motion for reconsideration and similar actions. That's when I informed them that earlier that morning I had received an anonymous email containing links to several videos of Linda and Dwayne in your bed, engaging in bed activities before their trip to Paris. The message threatened to distribute the videos to everyone Linda knew, asserting that you, Nick, were unaware and powerless to prevent it. They claimed to be allies, citing past assistance from you and pledged to shield you. They warned of sending the videos that day if she didn't drop the matter. Are you aware of this? I was out of town, Harry. Afterward, they departed. I haven't heard from them since. And there were no incidents at the courthouse. Frank resumed. They likely contacted the police because a couple of detectives arrived. They requested copies of the videos and filed a report. Then their interest waned. Neither Linda nor Dwayne could provide details. They only recalled getting into a taxi at the airport, then waking up in the hospital. Linda discovered herself in a seedy hotel room, having been assaulted before seeking medical attention. The room charges, along with room service and minibar expenses, were billed to her credit card. This time, Nick mentioned that the hotel manager had informed him that New York police had investigated his stay, and his New York acquaintances had been approached. However, they all confirmed his active presence in the city. Word on the street, Harry mentioned, is that your ex is holed up in her parents' basement getting laser tattoo removal. The snag is they charge by the square inch, and she's inked from head to toe. It's bound to rack up tens of thousands of dollars, and yet the marks will linger indefinitely. It's regrettable, Nick remarked. Harry fixed his gaze on Nick. Frank simply pressed his lips together to stifle laughter. What about your paramour? Heard he took quite a smacking, Harry queried. He's in for extensive physical therapy. Suffered some head trauma, multiple concussions. He might struggle to land another paralegal gig. Their firm cut ties with them both. Seems their relationship soured during the trip, and somehow it adversely impacted the entire arbitration. They were ill-prepared, short on documents, unready objections, problematic witnesses. They lost on the merits. Client wasn't pleased. Firm had to make some personnel sacrifices to salvage future work. One of these days, Nick, you'll have to divulge how you handled all this, Frank suggested. Handle what? I'm as innocent as a Boy Scout. Maggie waited in the car as Nick disembarked. I'm a bit peeved. No one bothered to inquire if I actually notarized the documents or if she read them before signing. I was prepared to testify that I witnessed her scrutinizing each one, but I couldn't gauge how much time she spent on it. Let's hash this out over dinner. I owe you and your boyfriend for aiding me in regaining my freedom. Maggie turned to him, peering over her sunglasses as Nick backed out of the parking spot. There's no guy, you dummy! Nick braked suddenly, meeting her gaze. Seriously? Absolutely. Now zip it and drive me home so you can commence the rather lengthy and grueling process of making amends. Sure thing, Nick grinned. But first, I need to swing by the post office. For what? Sending a card to an old friend, Nick replied, retrieving it from the glove compartment. It bore the Boy Scouts emblem. I'll ask her, does she feel safe now? Safe?
My world shattered, I discovered shocking proof of my wife brazenly cheating on me in my own car. My name is Ron, and I've been happily married to Lily for 15 years. Our family is a huge source of happiness for me, and I can really feel how much my wife loves me. Our marriage has grown in a way that makes me very happy. We're parents to 2 fantastic daughters in their early teens. Both of us have steady jobs. I work at a security company, and Lily is a voice translator at a film studio. We're healthy and live in a beautiful house in a nice area of the city. Life is great, and I don't think it could be any better. After our younger daughter was born, Lily gained some weight. However, her beautiful blue eyes, which stand out more behind her glasses. She doesn't use contact lenses because they bother her eyes when she reads or does paperwork, make her even more attractive. I'm deeply in love with Lily, and I know she loves me just as much. We have 2 amazing daughters, a comfortable house, and we don't worry about money. Everything was perfect in my life. But then, something bad happened after 15 years of marriage that could change everything and ruin my once perfect and happy life. Lately, Lily began a routine of hanging out with her women colleagues at various bars every other Friday. They rotate among 3 or 4 places they like. She goes out these Fridays to chat and relax after work, as she often tells me. I'm okay with her going out by herself. I get home by 4:30 every day to look after our daughters. When she's out with her colleagues on those nights, I make dinner for the girls and help them with homework, which I really enjoy. She typically gets back by 8, and then we spend the whole weekend together doing fun family activities and eating out with our daughters on Saturday night. But in recent months, she's been getting home later, around 10, on these girls' nights, and I've noticed she's had a few drinks. I didn't bring it up because she's still the same affectionate wife she's always been. Every time she returns from those nights out, she has this special smile that makes me want to hug her. I understand that her time with friends is her way to unwind and forget about a tough work week. I convinced myself it was just harmless fun with her colleagues, even if she started coming home later than before. Then, a few weeks ago, on a Monday morning, I received an email from someone who signed it as a friend. I almost deleted the message without reading it, but I decided to give it a second thought. The email said they were at the Black Crow last Friday and saw Lily enjoying herself with a group, especially dancing with a man from her group. They attached a picture taken with their cell phone, asking me to examine it closely. This email had already planted doubts in my mind, and I feared what I might find out. Despite knowing Lily danced during these outings, the email mentioned male co-workers, something she never told me. I always thought it was only her female friends. Even though she could have been dancing with someone already at the Black Crow, not part of their group, a lump formed in my throat, and I started feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Despite my reservations, I opened the attachment. The moment the picture appeared, I noticed it wasn't perfectly centered, suggesting the photographer was cautious to avoid being seen. I observed my wife's co-workers, both male and female, sitting at a long table in the background. The picture was somewhat blurry, but I could still make out my wife on the right side of the dance floor. She wore her beige blouse with red flowers and green leaves along with matching brown slacks, the same outfit from her last girls' night out. So I deduced the picture was taken the previous Friday when she arrived home later than usual at 10:30, giving me a hug and her usual smile. In the photo, she was on the dance floor with a tall young man, embracing tightly with both arms around his neck. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I couldn't recall ever dancing like that with Lily or any other girl in public. The man's lower body pressed tightly against her, and it seemed she could feel his hardness rubbing against her. He had to be aroused, as it's impossible not to be in that situation. Strangely, Lily didn't seem bothered. On the contrary, she appeared happy, pushing herself against him as they locked eyes. My wife, the mother of my daughters, was in the arms of a stranger, behaving provocatively in public. I couldn't believe what I saw. She wouldn't dance with me like that in public. Why was she letting a stranger act this way? Or was he truly a stranger? Doubt firmly took hold in my mind and grew fast beyond my control. Various scenarios of my wife with other men played out, making me feel sick. I rushed to the bathroom where I threw up my breakfast. Lily, my wife, was acting inappropriately in public. Was she having an affair? How could she do this to me and our 2 daughters? Many questions flooded my mind. Who was that man? Did they work together? How long had this been happening? Why was she involved with him? Update: for the next 30 minutes, I stayed in my office bathroom trying to clear my thoughts. Gradually, new emotions started emerging: disappointment, sadness, and anger, followed by a strong desire for revenge. A range of intense emotions took over me, creating a whirlwind of reactions. I felt the urge to kick Lily, to hug her and ask her to stop, or even to consider divorcing her. Then, a moment later, I'd think of forgiving her and giving her another chance. As I sat on the toilet, I thought I was losing my mind. Eventually, I regained control, deciding to do nothing but wait and watch Lily before taking any action. Making emotionally influenced decisions without knowing the full truth wouldn't make sense. I needed to wait and not tell her about what I already knew. Simultaneously, I was determined to get to the bottom of it all. One way or another, I had to get solid proof of what was going on. Was she cheating on me, or was she just having exaggerated fun? However, I already knew she had lied by omitting the whole truth about her evenings out with the girls. Her movie studio was only a couple of blocks away from my workplace. Since I was often on the road for work, checking on Lily was easy. The next day at 11:30, I parked at the end of her workplace's parking lot, feeling relatively safe with tinted windows. I watched the exit door until 1, but she never came out. I repeated this for the rest of the week, and on Friday at 12:15, I saw Lily and 3 others, a woman and 2 men, get into a black BMW. Lily sat in front, next to the driver, and they drove away. Naturally, I followed them. They drove downtown, entered the parking lot of a fancy restaurant, and I observed them laughing as they went inside. Parked in front of the restaurant, I stayed in my car until they came out at 2. Lily walked next to the tall, light-haired man, the driver, the same man she had been dancing with in the photo I already had. She seemed very cheerful and excited, touching his arms as they talked. This, more than anything else, angered me. They drove back to her workplace and all went inside. So far, Lily hadn't done anything wrong except for not mentioning to me that she sometimes went out to eat with both male and female coworkers. More importantly, the four of them at lunch acted as if they were two couples, not friends or coworkers, and that bothered me the most. That Friday, Lily didn't go out with the girls after work and got home at 5:15, cheerful and smiling as usual. It took a lot of willpower to control myself and not bombard her with questions. However, I asked her once, while quietly sitting in front of the television after supper, if she had a good day at work, and then I inquired about her lunch. For a few seconds, I noticed she didn't know exactly what to say, but soon enough, she told me she ate the tuna sandwich she had prepared before leaving for work in the morning. Calling her a liar and maybe a cheater, I told myself. Lily was looking at me with those big blue eyes that I love so much as she told that blatant lie. Although my anger was building, I still felt an urge to reach out and hug her. Of course, being in love with someone does that. I knew I had to control myself or risk doing something I might regret afterward. Instead of asking her more questions, I decided to change the subject and talk about my day at work, trying to act as I usually did. That weekend, Lily probably didn't realize we were facing a significant issue. Later that night, we were close twice, and she behaved like the affectionate wife she always had been. On Saturday, we took our daughters to the zoo, had a great family time, and for a brief moment, I forgot about the events of the past week. I didn't bother checking on her at noon for the rest of the week because I intended to follow her on Friday evening after work. On that Friday, when my two daughters arrived home at 4:15, I was already there waiting for them. After ordering pizza, I explained that I had to go to the office and would be home later in the evening. They were old enough to take care of themselves, and it didn't bother me to leave them alone in the house as long as they locked the door. I knew they would be in their room by the time I returned. At exactly 5, I got into my car and drove to Lily's workplace. I observed her getting into her car, and as she left the parking lot, she turned away from our home, heading to a pub for her evening out with the girls. I had no trouble following her, as there was a convoy of 6 cars between my SUV and her Toyota, all driving in the same direction towards a pub, watering hole, or a dance hall, whatever you want to call it. 10 minutes later, I saw Lily's Toyota and the other 6 cars entering the parking lot next to a combination bar restaurant called the Glass Shoe. I stayed in my car, parked at the other end. When everyone was inside, I got out and walked around the place to learn more about where she was going. The pub was relatively distant from other buildings, surrounded by parking spaces. 2 sides bordered streets, and the other 2 were defined by a well-trimmed 5ft high cedar hedge, in front of which were parking spaces. I noticed the black BMW from the convoy, which Lily had gotten into for the restaurant the previous Friday. It was now parked separately in front of the cedar hedge, away from the other cars. I observed separate sets of doors, one for the restaurant and another for the bar. There were fire doors at the back for both, but those were for emergencies only. Another entrance on the other side, where most cars were parked, also led to the bar. However, Lily's group had entered through the door for the restaurant part of the building. I returned to my car and began changing into clothes I had brought for the occasion. I wore a baseball cap and a black windbreaker. Then I added a pair of glasses to my disguise. To change my facial features somewhat, I inserted a protective denture into my mouth, similar to those worn by boxers. I knew I would have a hard time talking and drinking with this, but I didn't care since it was not my intention to get into a discussion or get drunk. Looking in the rear-view mirror, I knew that no one would recognize me. I waited another hour in my car before entering the bar. The group, including my wife, was seated together near the dance floor, drinking and having fun. Seeing Lily sitting close to the same guy she had gone to eat with the previous Friday saddened and disappointed me. I suspected that something might be going on between them. I picked a table at the back, far from them, to quietly observe. The section where I sat was dimmer. There were a couple of lonely souls like me drowning their sorrows. I knew no one would pay attention to me there. Soon the music started, and people moved to the dance floor. I noticed Lily dancing with the guy who sat next to her. The other 3 guys at their table had weird smiles, watching them dance. It was clear Lily and that guy were a couple, catching everyone's attention. After a couple of hours, only Lily, another girl, and 2 men remained. The rest had left. Both couples were on the dance floor, and my wife had her arms around the guy. It was evident they were lovers. He had his hands on Lily's waist, and they barely moved on the dance floor, just standing and rubbing against each other. Then I saw him kiss her and say something in her ear. I watched her nod, and they left the building holding hands. I followed them. It was already quite dark outside. I saw them walk hand in hand to his car, parked in the last row of the parking lot near the cedar hedge. He knew they wouldn't be bothered there, with no other cars nearby and the hedge at the back. What were they planning? How far would Lily let it go? I needed to find out. Carefully, I walked to the other end of the parking lot and then toward the cedar hedge. Staying close to the 5ft high hedge, I walked toward their car, hiding behind parked cars. Soon, I stood by the back of his BMW. At first, I saw no one inside due to the darkness. As I moved closer, attempting to look inside, the deeply tinted windows revealed nothing, but I heard muffled voices. Feeling desperate, I debated whether to intervene or wait to catch Lily in the act. After a brief moment, the decision was no longer mine. When I noticed the car shaking rhythmically, the guy was fooling around with my wife. I couldn't contain my rage. I yanked the door open, flooding the car with light, revealing my wife, Lily, lying on her back with her lover on top of her, caught red-handed. Having removed my disguise, Lily's eyes met mine, her expression shifting from bliss to shock in seconds. She mumbled an apology, urging me not to act rashly. Then, with urgency, she declared it meant nothing and asked me to wait for her, claiming she was going home. Slamming the door shut, I walked away, heading straight to my car. By the time I left the parking lot, Lily was already halfway to me, shouting for me to wait. Update: Lily arrived home less than 5 minutes after I did, appearing disheveled with messy hair and crumpled clothes. Tearfully, she approached me. She expressed deep remorse, apologizing for hurting me and breaking our marriage vows. Lily claimed that had she known I was being betrayed, she could have engaged in similar indiscretions. Despite her pleas, I felt an unexpected surge of anger. Her apologies continued as she insisted that her actions meant nothing to her, professing love for me and emphasizing the importance of our family. Overwhelmed, she cried, hiding her face and eventually sitting on the couch due to shaky legs. Dismissing her apologies, I asserted that what she did to our marriage was unforgivable and demanded to know the identity of the other person and the duration of their affair. I felt a sense of relief as she moved to the couch, removing her from my immediate presence. The urge to physically react to her betrayal lingered. She revealed the man's identity, someone from her workplace, and pleaded for understanding, claiming the affair should never have occurred. Lily justified her actions by pointing to supposed deception during girls' nights over the past 2 years, but insisted it didn't diminish her love for me. Expressing my inability to live with the public nature of her affair, I highlighted the impact on our reputation among co-workers and at social events. Lily begged for forgiveness, vowing that the betrayal would not recur and emphasizing the importance of salvaging our marriage and family. While she continued to speak, I stood up, turning away from her. I decided to leave to give myself time to think. I confronted her about destroying our marriage through her initial infidelity. A sudden cry and loud moan caught my attention, prompting me to look back at Lily on the floor, crying in desperation. Despite the overwhelming urge to comfort her, the anger and sense of betrayal made it clear I couldn't trust myself to stay near her. I silently left the house, spending the night in a hotel room without sleep. The next morning, I called my secretary and informed her I wouldn't be going to work for the day. I stayed in my room until noon. After grabbing a quick bite at the hotel restaurant, I passed by my house on the way to the office. There was a green Toyota in the driveway, which I recognized as Francine's, Lily's sister. At least I thought my daughters had their aunt's company, along with that of my cheating wife, providing a bit of comfort. What I didn't know then was that Lily was in the hospital. After leaving the house the previous evening and explaining the situation to her sister on the phone, Lily had a breakdown. It was only once I reached my office that I got the news. Francine, Lily's sister, called me, and we had a lengthy conversation. She explained that Lily was emotionally distressed and crying constantly. Less than an hour after I left the house the previous evening, my eldest daughter called Francine, saying Lily was delirious and I was not home. Francine then talked to her sister and promptly called an ambulance when she realized Lily's condition. Francine let me know she was still at my house, taking care of my 2 daughters for a few days. She strongly suggested that I visit my wife at Santa Mary's hospital in town. After the call ended, I was beyond shocked. Had I been selfish the previous evening? Did I abandon my family when they needed me the most? Maybe. But one thing was clear. If I stayed in the house with her that evening, there was a chance, however small, that I might have become violent due to what she had done. Yes, she wrecked our marriage, but until yesterday, I didn't see myself as someone who avoided problems. Was that exactly what I had done? Lily and I faced a significant problem, undoubtedly. But was that reason enough for me to abandon my family when they needed me? I felt terrible sitting behind my desk. I started crying, questioning if there could have been another way, a better way, with forgiveness and maybe reconciliation, a slim possibility. Of course, this mess was Lily's doing. She was entirely responsible for giving another man what should have been mine alone. However, breaking my marriage would hurt my 2 daughters too much. There had to be another solution. That's when I thought of forgiveness, with retribution. Once I recovered from the shock of learning about Lily's hospitalization, I got in my car and drove to the hospital. I had no idea what I would say to her, but one thing was certain: I was going to face the situation and find out exactly what she had done. Now I find myself lying in a hospital bed. A thought crosses my mind, recalling something my mother used to say: cheaters always face consequences, one way or another. Ron and I tied the knot when I was 20, and we were genuinely happy. We had 2 amazing daughters, a lovely home, a great neighborhood, and financial stability. More importantly, I loved my husband, and I knew he loved me back. When my youngest daughter turned 6, I landed a job at a film studio near Ron's workplace. With the fall of the Iron Curtain and the gradual democratization of communism, there was a high demand for U.S. films in Ukraine. Being fluent in Ukrainian and having acting experience from university, I secured a position as a female voice translator for English films, translating them into the Ukrainian language. It was a fantastic job with good pay, and I excelled at it. After 5 years, a new voice translator named Victor Dino joined us. He was a tall, attractive man in his late 20s with dark blonde hair. Most girls at the studio had a crush on him, but he seemed oblivious to the attention. Vic, born in the U.S. with Ukrainian-speaking grandparents, was perfectly bilingual. We started working together often, and a deep friendship developed between us. That's when my troubles began. Without realizing it, I found myself thinking I was in love with him. Initially, he treated me like the other girls, discussing work matters, and we worked well together. Eventually, he started joining us on alternate Fridays, and our friendship grew into something deeper. We became more than just colleagues. We became good friends. I confided in him about my life, sharing things I had never told my husband. Especially when Vic began joining us at the pubs, my first mistake was not telling Ron that our girls' night out was now mixed. I enjoyed Vic's company and didn't want to share his attention with my husband on those nights. Our friendship turned into something deeper, and we found ourselves dancing together frequently. I didn't realize how far things had gone until one evening, while dancing to a slow song, he kissed me passionately. It wasn't a friendly or family kiss. I was shocked. That's how it all started. The following Friday, he found an excuse to take me out of the pub, and we engaged in intimate moments in his car. From there, our passion escalated, and soon we were engaging in more explicit activities in the backseat of his car. Despite feeling guilty when I got home, I made sure to show Ron the love he deserved. However, I failed to realize that Ron, as my husband, deserved my complete love, and I shouldn't have given any of it to Vic. Working with Vic every day made it impossible to keep away from him. Gradually, even at work, we developed the habit of hugging and kissing when no one was around. From my perspective, this behavior with Vic didn't diminish my love for Ron. I still would have given my life for him, and I had no intention of hurting him with my affair with Vic. I was wrong. Making love with Vic wasn't better than making love with my husband. By the time Ron found out about my affair with Vic, we had been lovers for 4 months. While I didn't love Vic like I loved my husband, the physical aspect was fantastic. The freedom I felt with Vic, not having to restrain myself, made all the difference. When making love with my husband, I had to hold back to avoid him thinking less of me. With Vic, I had no such restrictions, since I didn't care what he thought about me. This was the main reason I did things with Vic that I had never done with my husband. I think Vic and I were really thoughtless and careless in how we behaved in front of our colleagues. Vic didn't care much since he wasn't married. But because of our public behavior, it was only a matter of time before my husband found out about me and Vic from a jealous coworker. We should have been more discreet. Even if Ron never found out about my affair, I now understand it would still have been terribly wrong. The evening Ron caught us was the worst moment of my life. He yelled at me to go to hell and take my lover with me. Just before he turned to leave the car, I knew my marriage was in deep trouble. I even stepped on Vic in my rush to leave his car and catch up with my husband, but I was too late. By the time I was halfway to his car, he was speeding away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the parking lot. Until then, I considered my love for Ron like a fire burning only for him, and I knew he felt the same about me. Then one day, when Vic entered my life and kissed me for the first time, it was like a spark from that fire ignited another fire burning for Vic. These emotions for Vic didn't take anything away from the love I felt for my husband. I convinced myself it was like when my youngest daughter was born. Loving her with all my heart didn't reduce the love I still had for my eldest daughter. It's incredible, the things we tell ourselves to justify our basest urges. Children don't expect a parent to love only them, and we never vow to our children to forsake all others. Yes, the love of a parent for a child is far different from the love one should have for their spouse. But I made sure those thoughts never reached my consciousness while I played games with Vic. I know my husband doesn't see it the same way I did then, and I don't blame him. I understand that if the roles were reversed and he had another woman in his life, I would be devastated. Human thoughts and emotions are mysterious, and sometimes we shouldn't try to reason them. So now, I'm here in a hospital bed. Each time I wake from my dreamless rest, I start thinking about the events of the last few months. I cry and feel sorry for myself. Then the nurse injects me again with something, and I sleep once more. A wonderful sleep that allows me to forget everything. I wish I could never wake up again and find peace with myself. But each time, just before I pass out, I see a picture of Ron and me on our wedding day. Oh God, help me, my children, my husband. I can't leave them. I must fight the urge to hide on the other side. Life is a never-ending combat. My father once told me, if you stop fighting, then you had no right to be living in the first place. I am alive. Ron and my daughters are alive. And I will live also. After all, they are the loves of my life. Yes, I will, for my husband and my family. To me, Vic is just dirt now. He had absolutely no right to be in my life in the first place. If Ron allows me, I will be, once again and for the rest of my life, the faithful wife I used to be. When I wake up, how long in the future, I don't know. But I will come back into my family's world. Of that, I am certain. When I do, the first thing I hope to see is my husband standing there in front of me, so that I can start the difficult task of making it up to him. I don't know how many days I have to stay here in the hospital bed, but I beg everyone to pray for Ron and our daughters.
I believe that where you come from shapes who you become, and my journey started before I was born. In the late 1970s, my parents left West Germany seeking better opportunities. They immigrated to Canada with dreams of a new life, and my mother was pregnant with me when they arrived in Montreal. My father, a trained goldsmith, quickly found work, and they began building a future not just for themselves, but for the family they were starting. Growing up, I heard stories about the sacrifices they made. My father's dedication led to a comfortable life for us, and by the time my brother Michael was born, he had opened his own jewelry shop in the West End, a testament to his hard work. We lived well in Beaconsfield, but I knew their journey hadn't been easy. My name is Jacob Faltz, though most people call me Jake. My parents left West Germany in 1979, before reunification, and settled in Montreal, where I was born. My father found work as a goldsmith, and a few years later, my brother Michael was born. Life flourished as my father opened his own jewelry store, allowing us to live comfortably. They now spend winters in Florida. I was an average student, more interested in girls and hockey than studies. I struggled to find a job in French-speaking Quebec with only adequate spoken French. Eventually, I joined a Vancouver-based building materials company in customer service. A year later, I transferred to Vancouver, where my French skills surprisingly helped me land the job. I immediately fell in love with the city, its modern vibe, beaches, and mountains. I made friends through work and hockey. I joined a beer league and ended up as a first-line defenseman because I could skate backward. It was fun and kept me fit. At the end of the season, I met Judy Hansen at a team barbecue. Like me, she was from Montreal. We hit it off, exchanged numbers, and started dating. Judy was attractive, with short, dark brown hair and a slim figure. Within a year, I proposed, and after some discussion about our future, she accepted. We had been physical engaged for months, and while Judy was a bit conventional, we both seemed satisfied. Judy worked as a lab technician, conducting medical tests for private clinics across the province. She was proud of her hard-earned position and enjoyed both the work and her colleagues, who were all women except for their boss, Bob Turnbull. When we planned our future, we calculated that if I secured the sales job, our combined income would be close to $90,000, potentially enough to buy a house in the competitive market. Judy accepted my proposal on the condition that I got the job, and a few months later, I did. We set a wedding date and shared the news with our families. While my parents were thrilled, Judy's parents were more cautious, though they eventually made plans to attend the wedding. We got married in a small suburban church and honeymooned briefly in Victoria and Seattle before returning to our rented apartment. I worked hard in my new sales role, meeting my targets, while Judy continued at the lab with her more predictable hours. Despite our different schedules, life was smooth, and we saved enough to buy a townhouse in the suburbs, celebrating our third anniversary shortly after moving in. We talked about starting a family, but Judy insisted on waiting until we were more financially stable, though she never specified when that would be. As with many marriages, our sex life gradually slowed down. Before marriage, we were physical engaged 4 or 5 times a week, but after 3 years, it dropped to once or twice a week. I eventually brought it up with Judy, but her response was defensive, suggesting that work was tiring us out. Though I missed our earlier frequency, I adjusted to the new pace, realizing that not all couples always want the same things at the same time. Overall, we seemed happy and on track for a successful marriage. It may seem surprising, But I developed a close friendship with a woman, Cindy Willows, after she and her husband Al moved in next door. Despite being best friends, there was no romantic or sexual element between us. Cindy was a stay-at-home mom with 2 elementary-aged children, while Al worked as a car salesman. She had a sharp wit, a no-nonsense attitude, and a bold sense of humor. Cindy, slightly taller than Judy with reddish blonde hair and blue eyes, often joked about how Al did the honorable thing by marrying her after she got pregnant. They had 2 kids, Annabeth, a 10-year-old in 5th grade, and Bradley, a 7-year-old in 2nd grade. Cindy sometimes called her husband Alvin when annoyed, but most knew him as Al. He was about 6 feet tall, with curly red hair, a ruddy complexion, and flashy style, bright suits, a Rolex knockoff, and a gold ring. Al seemed to believe this was the ideal car salesman look, and his upbeat, always-on personality could be either endearing or irritating. Unfortunately, I found him more annoying, though Judy was neutral toward him. However, I liked Cindy's straightforwardness, and we became good friends over time. I also liked her kids. Annie, as she was often called, was polite and charming, destined to be a heartbreaker. Brad was playful and always cheerful, with good manners that I appreciated. Judy, however, kept her distance from them, which made me wonder if she was signaling a reluctance to have children. If we were going to start a family, I hoped our kids would be like Annie and Brad. Things took a downturn last spring. After 6 years of marriage and nearly saving enough for a house, I was suddenly laid off when my company was sold and the branch closed. The news shocked me, and Judy's reaction was one of anger and disappointment, as if I had failed her. It was a tough blow to my morale. I began job hunting immediately, but opportunities in my field were scarce. Judy would leave for work with a quick kiss, while I spent my days searching for jobs and feeling increasingly discouraged. After 2 frustrating weeks, I was feeling low when Cindy appeared one morning. "Hey, handsome, got any more coffee?" she asked with her usual playful spirit. She often called me handsome, even in front of Al and Judy, and they didn't seem to mind. I invited her in, and as we chatted, I told her about losing my job. Cindy, in her blunt way, acknowledged how tough it was, but immediately started thinking of ways to help. Unlike Judy, who seemed distant, Cindy was actively concerned. She asked about my best subject in school, and I mentioned English, especially writing. Cindy then mentioned a friend who worked from home writing manuals and turning down business due to high demand. She suggested I talk to her friend about potential opportunities. "Great, thank you, Cindy," I said, appreciating her willingness to help. Her name was Paula Woods, and when Cindy handed me the phone, I caught her at the perfect time. I offered to call back later, but she was on a break and happy to chat since I was a friend of Cindy's. Paula shared that she had been in a similar situation, unemployed and in need of work, when she found an ad for a job writing manuals and instructions for an import-export business. The company needed someone to create clear English instructions for products from China, as the translations they were receiving were comically bad. Paula took the job and never looked back. "They're also looking for someone who can translate into French," Paula said. "They've been using an expensive translation service, but they need someone in-house who can both write and translate. It's especially tough with the machinery manuals." She gave me the agency's name and her contact, and I asked if I could mention her name. She agreed, and I handed the phone back to Cindy while I poured us both more coffee. "Cindy, you and Paula might have just saved my life. I can't thank you enough," I said. "No need. It was nice to see you perk up again. You looked pretty down earlier," she replied. "Yeah, well, Judy hasn't fully grasped our situation yet. She's not thrilled about me being out of work. It's really messed up our plans." "Jake, you didn't get fired. This happens to people all the time. It's just how things are now. Al's come home down before too, but I give him a pep talk and, well, a little fun, and he's back at it the next day," she laughed. "Sounds like a good strategy," I said, feeling envious that Cindy could handle things that way when Judy was so negative. I called the number Paula gave me and spoke with Mr. Lewis. I mentioned Paula's name and offered to provide a free sample of my work. He was interested and asked if I could meet him that afternoon. We set an appointment for 2 p.m., and I was so relieved that I hugged Cindy nearly in tears. "You don't know how good this feels, Cindy." "Glad to help," she replied with a grin. Cindy left around 11, and I quickly showered, shaved, and dressed in a clean shirt, navy blazer, and tan slacks. I didn't change until after lunch to avoid any spills. I met with Mr. Louis at 2 p.m. He was a balding mid-50s Asian man in a rumpled suit, which made me wonder if he was looking for cheap labor. But since Paula had spoken highly of him, I gave him a chance. He explained that he imports machines from China and Thailand, ranging from plastics manufacturing to woodworking. The Chinese to English translations were so bad that even he couldn't understand them, despite reading the original Chinese. He needed clear English instructions for his customers and French translations to sell in Quebec. The high cost of translation services wasn't providing the quality he needed, especially since they didn't understand the machinery. He was looking for someone who could do both. I understand your situation. Let's give it a try, and if I can do the job, we can agree on a fair fee. Sound good? I suggested. Yes, that works for me. I hope you can handle this because it would be a great help to my business, and I'll make sure it's worth your while, he assured me. Why don't you give me a sample to work on? I can either do it here or take it home and return it when it's done. He smiled and said, My computer is a bit outdated. It's better if you use yours and let me know when you're finished. Then we can review the results. Great. Show me the instructions, and I'll get started. He handed me a thin folder from a stack and led me into his warehouse, filled with crates and machinery. This is the machine the instructions are for. Look it over and ask if you have any questions. I compared the drawings in the manual to the actual machine. They matched, but I asked, how accurate are these drawings? Most are good, but sometimes they send old drawings with new machines, which causes issues. I can't sell machines without the correct drawings. It's bad for business. I can see that. These seem accurate. So I'll start on the instructions. If I hit any snags, I'll call. This first job is a trial run to see if I can do the work and if it's a viable job for me. He nodded with a smile. A wise approach. I left, excited about the potential of this new opportunity. It wasn't related to my previous job, but it seemed more interesting. If it worked out, I was sure I'd be happier. However, Judy wasn't as optimistic. What do you know about machinery? How can you make money from this? She questioned. I know someone who's already doing it successfully and working from home, which I'd like to do. Oh, great. You'll sit around all day while I work hard in the lab. Why do you think that? Working from home would save us money, no commuting costs. It seems like a good situation. Show me you can actually earn a living, Jake. I have my doubts. If it were that easy, everyone would be doing it. Remember, I have a mechanical mind and writing skills. Plus, I'm bilingual. That's rare here. I think I have a good shot, but I need to try. How much is this guy paying you? Nothing yet. It's a free trial to prove I can do the job. Once I know what my time is worth, I'll set a price. Great. You're working for nothing on a job you don't even know if you can do. Fantastic, she said, stomping off to the kitchen. Her reaction deflated my enthusiasm, but I was determined to prove myself. After dinner, I went straight to our home office and began working on the instructions. The English version was so poorly translated that it was almost impossible to understand. I took a deep breath and started rewriting. By midnight, after pushing through a headache and stiff neck, I had finished a page and a half of the 6-page instructions. It was slow progress, but I was finding a rhythm. Exhausted, I headed to bed, took a couple of Tylenol, and quickly fell asleep, satisfied with my effort. When I woke up, Judy was already dressed and having her usual yogurt and granola breakfast. As expected, there was no coffee since she doesn't drink it. I greeted her and she mumbled something in return. After a quick peck on the cheek, she left for work at 7:10 a.m. I went to our office, reviewed last night's work, fixed a few small errors, and continued where I left off. I was on my second or third cup of coffee when I heard Cindy's familiar voice. Yoo-hoo! It's me again, handsome, she called from the back door with a smile in her voice. Come on in, Cindy. Grab a coffee. I'm in my office. She entered, sarcastically commenting on my appearance. I was still in my t-shirt and boxers. Just because I haven't shaved or dressed doesn't mean I'm a slob, I joked back. Cindy laughed and asked, What you working on? Page 3 of 6, translating instructions for the Heavenly Blossom Model 356K 14 thickness planer, I replied with exaggerated seriousness. Cindy burst out laughing. Where do they get these goofy names? I shrugged. No idea, but this is tougher than I thought. I spent 5 hours last night just getting through a page and a half. It's going faster now, though. Should finish by noon and then start on the French. And you're doing this for free? She asked, sounding like Judy. Yeah, Judy wasn't impressed either. But it's the results that will matter. I'll know soon if this is worth pursuing. Good luck, Jake. I believe you're going to surprise Judy, Cindy said, always direct and supportive. After a brief silence, Cindy asked, Jake, can I ask you something personal? Sure, go ahead. Do you think you and Judy are really happy? I paused, staring at my coffee. It's a good question, Cindy. A damn good one. I left it at that. By 11:30 a.m., I finished the English version and called Mr. Louis. letting him know I'd have the French done by the afternoon. He was pleased and told me to come by any time. That boosted my confidence. After a quick lunch and some help from my dictionary, I finished the French version by 2:30 p.m. I double-checked both versions and found no errors. I dressed in business clothes and headed to Mr. Lewis's office. He reviewed my English version, occasionally nodding and making minor notes. Finally, he looked up. "Excellent, Mr. Jake. I'll send your versions for verification. If your French checks out, we have a deal." He then asked how many hours I spent on the work. When I told him 11, he said, "I'll have a check for $660 ready tomorrow." I reminded him that this was supposed to be a free trial, but he insisted, "I don't take advantage of good work. I believe we can do good business together." He also advised me to incorporate my business to avoid future tax issues and protect myself from liability. I thanked him sincerely and asked him to inform me of any problems with the French version. As I was about to leave, he surprised me by asking, "Don't you want your next assignment?" "Of course," I stammered, eager to continue. He smiled and said, "I'm confident your French version will be as good as your English. Thanks to Miss Paula for introducing you." He handed me another manual, and we reviewed the machine in the back. After confirming the drawings were current, we shook hands, and I left with a spring in my step. At $60 an hour, a 40-hour week would gross over $120,000 a year. Seeing the stack of work on Mr. Lewis's desk, I felt optimistic. When I told Judy, the substantial pay rate seemed to improve her mood, and she even suggested we celebrate that night. I was feeling much better about our future and eager to tell Cindy, who had sparked the idea. The next morning, I started on the new manual, which was easier due to my experience and the simpler machine. I finished the English version by 1 p.m. and the French before dinner, 8 hours total. The following morning, I called Mr. Louis, who was pleased with my work and eager for the next project. I delivered it to him later that day. "Mr. Lewis, can we arrange a system where I don't have to drive in daily? I could work on a week's worth at a time and email the finished translations." He agreed and suggested direct deposit for payments, which I appreciated, though I needed to set up a business account first. We discussed drafting a contract, and I told him I'd consult my business advisor. After reviewing 5 new manuals and machines, I noted one omission, but found the job straightforward. By the end of the week, I had a new career in business, Precise Word Services. I filed for a GST license, opened a business account, printed business cards, and designed letterhead. On my lawyer's advice, I drafted a letter of understanding for Mr. Louis outlining our agreement and hourly rate. I also bought a color laser printer as a business expense. By Thursday, I completed and returned 5 manuals and picked up 6 more, reviewing the machines before leaving. I wondered how many machines Mr. Lewis had as I booked 46 hours that week, earning nearly $4,000. With Friday's work, I would likely double that amount. I was working nonstop in my home office. Judy barely saw me except during dinner, where we had brief conversations. For the first few weeks, she shifted from disdain to curiosity about my new job, asking questions like, "How often do you get paid?" "I get paid per job. I'm a contractor, so I handle my own taxes and expenses," I explained. She then hinted at needing money. "Can you spare $1,000? Things are tight since you lost your job." "Sure," I agreed cautiously, even though my business was already bringing in about $3,000 a week. I transferred $1,000 from my business account to our joint checking account. Judy seemed surprised, but pleased. It felt good to contribute again, even though I hadn't been out of work long. I decided to meet with Mr. Louis to gauge the future of this business. He reassured me that more complex machines were on the way, meaning plenty of work ahead. Relieved, I knew I could relax a bit. On a warm day, Cindy stopped by as usual. She greeted me with a smile. "Hey, handsome, where have you been?" I beckoned her over, replying, "Come on over and I'll tell you," content with how things were unfolding. As Cindy joined me, I couldn't resist sharing some news with a hint of pride. "You're now speaking to the president of Precise Word Services, Inc., Jacob R. Faltz." She laughed off my announcement. "Yeah, right, the president. Sure, Jake." We shared a lighthearted moment before she remarked, "It's good to see you happy. It's been a while." Acknowledging her observation, I admitted, "Yeah, it feels like a weight's been lifted. I can move forward again." Her curiosity piqued. She inquired, "How does Judy feel about it?" I met her gaze, confessing, "She doesn't really know." Cindy seemed puzzled. "You mean she can't decide?" "No," I clarified. "I haven't told her how well the business is doing." She paused briefly before responding, "Oh." I then reminded her, "Cindy, remember when you asked if Judy and I were really happy? She nodded. Yeah. Reflecting on our situation, I confided. I'm not so sure anymore. I haven't lied to her, but I haven't told her everything either. Why not? She pressed. I shrugged, uneasy. I don't know. I just have this feeling something's off. After a thoughtful pause, I posed a hypothetical question. If you were in my place making good money, would you tell Al? Cindy considered my question, then replied, Jake, that's a tough question. We live on Al's commissions, and it's hard sometimes. I'd hate to think he'd hold out on me. I expressed my concern. Yeah, that's what's bothering me. I'm holding out on Judy, and I'm not sure why. Cindy responded matter-of-factly, That's easy. You don't trust her. I asked, seeking affirmation, You think? She was confident in her observation. I know. I can tell something's wrong between you two, and I'm pretty sure it's not you. Curious, I asked her, Why do you say that? Cindy was frank. I know you, Jake. You're straightforward, no nonsense. I've noticed how Judy treats you when she thinks no one is watching. She acts like she married beneath her. I don't know why, but that's what I see. I murmured thoughtfully. Her parents? Cindy inquired, What about them? I explained, They don't think much of me. Maybe it's rubbing off on her. Cindy scoffed. Are her parents royalty or something? No, her dad's a city employee, and her mom works part-time at a market. Definitely not royalty, I clarified. Cindy, frustrated, advised, Then they should be grateful she married someone who treats her well. You deserve better. I sighed, pondering. Maybe they had higher expectations for her. As Cindy leaned back, she asked, So, what now? I confessed, I don't know. I still love her, but it feels like she's given up on me. I hope I'm wrong. Cindy responded softly, I hope so too, Jake. Though there were no signs Judy was having an affair, I began to worry. A few weeks later, she mentioned working overtime due to a reorganization at the lab. We seemed to be drifting apart, which made me sad. I was nearing 28, and we hadn't started a family, and I wondered if we ever would. I cut back on night work to spend more time with Judy, hoping to reconnect. I also began contributing $800 to $1,000 a week to our joint account, explaining that the business was now stable. Despite our improved finances, our relationship remained distant. We made love only once or twice a week, and no amount of effort on my part could change that. Meanwhile, my business with Mr. Louis was thriving. He regularly praised my work, and as I became more efficient, I found time for myself. Occasionally, I'd take a break to enjoy a lunch out or a beer at the local bar. After our intense conversation weeks earlier, Cindy and I didn't see each other much until I started inviting her over for morning coffee. It became our daily time to talk openly, without worrying about being overheard. One day, Cindy asked, How's Judy? Same, distant, I replied. Do you think you two will make it? I want to keep trying, but I'm not sure, I admitted. Both of you need to try for it to work, she said. Yeah, I know. Then she paused and said, Jake, she's cheating on you. I froze. Cindy would never joke about something like that. You know this? I asked quietly. Yeah, I know. With who? I asked, my voice shaking. Her boss, Turnbull. How long? I asked, feeling cold inside. Not long with him, but he's not the first. What? Who else? I found out Al slept with her a few months ago. Holy crap, anyone else? I don't know, but one's enough, isn't it? Yeah, more than enough, I said. I'm going to kick Al out. I'm done with him. He's done this before, and if I let it slide, he'll do it again. I'm looking for a job before I leave him. I won't let my kids live in poverty. Jesus, Cindy, can this get any worse? I groaned. I remember you asking me something similar when you lost your job, and Judy gave you hell for it, she reminded me. What a mess, I said, feeling utterly frustrated. Yeah, she agreed. Well, I guess I'll be rethinking my financial plans. No way am I giving Judy anything after this. She can go live with her boss. Can't blame you. Just don't do anything that'll land you in jail. I need you for my morning coffee, she joked, trying to lighten the mood. Maybe we should both kick them out and move in together, I said, half joking. You're forgetting something, Jake. The kids. No, I'm not. If they don't come with us, the deal's off, I joked back, trying to lift the heaviness of the moment. Cindy laughed, but I noticed tears in her eyes. We both needed a release from the heaviness of the situation, so we shared a laugh. It felt good to have someone to talk to. We decided to set aside our spouse problems for the day. I had work to finish, and I needed to figure out how to cope with living with Judy until I decided what to do. Surprisingly, I felt emotionally detached. more disappointed than angry. I even wondered how many others there had been besides Al and her boss. That evening, I acted as if nothing had changed, though it took me longer than usual to fall asleep. I kept thinking about what to do and realized I needed proof. Not that I doubted Cindy, but I wanted to see it myself. The next morning, Judy claimed she had to work late again, which I suspected meant she was seeing her boss. I called Cindy, borrowed her car, and staked out the clinic parking lot. Sure enough, Judy came out with a tall man in a nice suit. They got into a Mercedes, and I followed them to a hotel. I watched them check in, each carrying a small overnight bag. I took several pictures, confirming what I needed to know. I returned Cindy's car and told her what I saw. She hugged me and advised me to cool down and think before confronting Judy. We agreed to talk more the next day. The next morning, Cindy and I had time to discuss our next steps before the kids got home. I was angry and hurt by Judy's betrayal, but knew the marriage was over. There was no doubt about that. I asked Cindy how she found out. She explained that gossip spread through mutual acquaintances. One of Judy's coworkers noticed the affair with her boss, and it eventually reached Cindy through a chain of people who knew we were neighbors. Cindy added that many people were aware of Judy's affair. When I asked how she found out about Al and Judy, Cindy said it was through a nosy neighbor who noticed Al visiting my house when I was away. I guess Judy fell for his talk about being a big deal at work, Cindy said, shaking her head. Cindy then asked if Judy's boss, Turnbull, was married. I confirmed he was, but I didn't know much else. Cindy grabbed my phone book, looked up his number, and called. "Hello, is this Mrs. Richard Turnbull?" Cindy asked. After a brief silence, she apologized, pretending she had the wrong number, and hung up, giving me a knowing smile. "He's married and they don't have any kids," Cindy confirmed. I shook my head, realizing how sharp she was. No wonder I could never fool her. We sat quietly for a bit. "I think we should visit City Hall, Jake. I'd like to see who owns the clinic property," she suggested. "What's on your mind?" I asked. "You might find some leverage. A title search can reveal interesting things. Let's go if you have the time." "All the time in the world," I smiled. 10 minutes and $10 later, we discovered that the clinic's property title was under Mrs. Diane Turnbull's name, matching the home address of Robert Turnbull. "Looks like Mrs. Turnbull has the upper hand," Cindy said with a smirk. "So Loverboy's wife owns the building, and maybe he's just the manager," I guessed. "Exactly. I'll bet Judy doesn't know that. If he's playing her, she's in for a rude awakening when I dump her," I replied. "Ain't that a shame?" Cindy chuckled. We left City Hall and grabbed lunch together. Being with Cindy always lifted my spirits. We avoided discussing our personal issues until we were back at the townhouse. "So what's next?" I wondered aloud. "Did you take the pictures I suggested?" Cindy asked. "Yeah," I said, pulling out my camera and connecting it to my computer. We looked through the photos. These shots at the hotel desk and elevator don't leave much doubt. You could hire a private detective for more evidence, but it probably isn't worth it. Whether you divorce her for infidelity or irreconcilable differences, the outcome will be the same. Save your money and brace for the worst, Cindy advised. "I never thought it would come to this," I said, shaking my head. "No one ever does. I didn't think Al would cheat on me, but he did, more than once. I'm just stuck for now, needing a job before I can leave him and provide for the kids," Cindy said. "I've been thinking about something," I started cautiously. "Hear me out with an open mind." "I'll try," she replied, focusing on my words. "The other day, I joked about us moving in together with the kids, but the more I think about it, the more I like the idea. My income will exceed $125,000 this year. I'm doing well with work, and I could buy a 4-bedroom house in the same school district. You and the kids could move in as tenants until you find a job you like. No strings attached," I proposed. "That's a sweet offer, Jake, but it wouldn't be fair to you. What about your personal life and future? You don't want to stay single forever, do you?" she asked. "No, but this doesn't have to be permanent. If you find a job and want to move out, you can. At least you'd be in a stable environment with the kids," I explained. "Jake, you're a great guy, but what if I move out? What will you do with a big house then?" she asked, concerned. I shrugged. "Maybe you won't want to move out," I said, almost cringing. Cindy's eyes widened. "Are you saying you have feelings for me?" I nodded. "Sorry, but yeah." "Oh, Jake, don't do this to me," she said, clearly conflicted. "Do what?" I asked with a slight smile. "Don't mess with my head. This is too much. I haven't even kicked Al out yet, and now you're coming on to me." "It's not fair," she said, frustrated. "I know. But what they did to us wasn't fair either. This isn't about fairness. It's about what we both know. If you don't feel the same, just say so, I replied. Cindy sat quietly, tears forming in her eyes. She got up, wandered around the kitchen and living room, shaking her head and mumbling to herself. I took it as a good sign. She hadn't said no or gotten angry. She was uncertain, but not offended. "Damn you, Jake," Cindy finally said, walking toward me. "How could you?" Then, without another word, she wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a tight embrace. When she let go, I stood up and hugged her back. "Can I take that as a yes, then?" I asked. "Of course. How could I say no to you?" she replied, wiping away tears but smiling. "No strings, Cindy. If it works, great. If not, no pressure," I reassured her. She looked into my eyes and said, "I'll make sure it works," then started crying again. I felt hopeful that we could get through the tough times ahead and come out better on the other side. Following Don Simmons' advice, I hired a family law firm and retained Marta Kinsey, a sharp lawyer dedicated to protecting my interests. I decided not to hide my new income during the divorce. I'd disclose everything if necessary, but negotiate to avoid alimony. Marta suggested a bluff, proposing we offer Judy a split of current assets and no alimony, hoping she'd accept without knowing about my new business. I told Marta I'd serve Judy the papers soon, and she prepared the documents. The next week passed without incident, though Judy had 2 more overtime sessions. Marta called to confirm everything was ready, so I called Cindy. "It's D-Day, Cindy. I have the papers and need to figure out how to deliver them. Want to come over?" "Sure, I'll be right there. Get the coffee ready." We chatted over coffee before I laid out my plan. Tonight, I'll confront Judy, tell her I know about Turnbull, and give her the divorce papers. If she resists, I'll show her the photos and mention witnesses. I'll also remind her that Mrs. Turnbull doesn't know about the affair, which could push her to agree. If things get ugly, I'll move out and we can fight it out legally. "Have you packed a bag?" Cindy asked. "Not yet, but I will before she gets home. No overtime tonight," I said with a smirk. Cindy kissed me lightly and hugged me. "Good luck. Tell me how it goes. Once this is over, we'll figure out how to handle Al, which will be tougher." We knew Al wouldn't take things quietly, so Cindy planned to stay in their townhouse until things settled down. I even loaned her enough from Marta's retainer, and we decided to tackle our situations together. That evening, after our usual dinner routine, I told Judy we needed to talk. She tensed up, probably expecting another "we're not close" conversation. "Enough talk, Judy. I know about your affair with Robert Turnbull. Since you don't respect me or our marriage, I'm divorcing you. Here are the papers," I said calmly, surprised by how composed I felt. Her shocked expression was priceless. She gasped for air, coughing and struggling to respond. "How?" was all she could manage. "You weren't discreet. Plenty of people, including your coworkers, knew about the affair." "Oh, God. I'm sorry, Jake. I wish I could say something. I'm so sorry." I shrugged. "I'm proposing a 50-50th split. We can sell the townhouse and split the equity, or you can buy me out. I won't be living here again." I remained calm and clear-headed. Judy nodded, saying, "That's fair," though she couldn't look at me. I couldn't resist asking why she hadn't spoken up sooner. I thought she might offer an excuse, but she didn't. "I thought Robert would give me a better life. He's successful, and I believed he could offer more than you could." I considered bursting her bubble, but remembered Marta's advice. "Don't overplay your hand." Instead, I said, "I hope you find happiness. Clearly, you weren't happy with me." "It wasn't you, Jake. You were always good to me. I just wanted more out of life than you could give," she admitted. "An upgrade?" I muttered. "Maybe. Robert is wealthy, and I thought he'd provide a good life after his divorce." "He's married?" I feigned surprise. Judy nodded, looking ashamed. "I'm not proud of it. We cheated, but we were good together." Her voice trailed off. "I'm moving out, Judy. I'll stay in a motel until I find a place. If you agree to the settlement, the papers are here. You might want to consult a lawyer," I said, hoping she'd accept the offer. "No, I won't fight it. I hurt you, and I'm to blame. 50-50th is fair. I'll sign the papers tonight," she said, still avoiding eye contact. When I returned with my bag, she seemed surprised that I was already packed, but said nothing. She handed me the signed papers, and I checked them before putting them in my pocket. "I'll come by tomorrow to get the rest of my things in my computer files," I told her. "Of course. This is still your house, Jake." She finally looked at me, her sadness almost making me reconsider. I kissed her cheek and said, "Goodbye, Judy," then quietly left. I had won my freedom, but lost what I had once hoped for. It felt like a hollow victory, but I knew I couldn't stay with her after what she'd done. At the motel, I called Marta the next morning and told her how things went. She was pleased. No drama, just a quiet end to my marriage. I thanked her and hung up. I dropped off the papers on my way to the house, realizing it no longer felt like home. I gathered my clothes and personal items, leaving behind anything else. Judy could keep the photos, and we'd split the furniture later. In my office, I reflected on the end of an 8-year chapter of my life. Though I didn't feel great about it, I knew I had to move on. Thinking of Cindy lifted my spirits. I started downloading my files to my new laptop, a task that would take most of the morning. I informed Mr. Lewis that I needed a week off due to personal issues, and he was understanding. I promised to catch up the following week. Working from the motel wouldn't be ideal, but it was manageable. I missed my morning coffee with Cindy, but we were being cautious until she served Al with divorce papers. We met at an espresso shack on Friday and parked in a quiet lot to talk. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "Okay. I'm not looking forward to telling Al. I'll do it in the morning after the kids go to school. It's the only time we're alone," Cindy replied. Marta advised me not to insist he leave if there's no other place for him to sleep. But I'm not sharing a bed with him any longer than necessary. "What about the kids? When will you tell them, assuming Al will be gone when they get home?" "I'll tell them then," Cindy said. "Do you think they can handle it?" I asked. "Annie will be okay, but I found out something that seals it for Al," Cindy said, pausing to sip her latte. "Annie got into an argument with a classmate, and the girl said her dad was a regular visitor at her friend's mom's house. The mom's name is Mimi Tremonte, a divorcee. Annie got upset, but the girl stood her ground and even told Annie to ask the mom if she didn't believe it." Cindy looked defeated, a side of her I hadn't seen before. "How's Annie handling it?" I asked. I calmed her down and told her not to believe everything, but I think she knows. She's only 10, but kids grow up fast. "I'm sorry, Cindy. It's hard on them. Telling the kids that I'm leaving their father won't be easy. They'll still see him, but it's going to hurt." I nodded, knowing Cindy didn't want to deny Al visitation. After a pause, Cindy added, "They asked about you, you know." "Really? I'm surprised. They like you a lot. Having you around will help them adjust. You're more like a dad than anyone else." "Thanks. I'm looking forward to that and being with you," I said. She reached for my hand. "You said you wanted to talk. What's on your mind?" "I want you to come with me to see a house I'm thinking of buying. I'd like your opinion since you'll be living there too." "Sure, let's do it. I could use the distraction," she agreed with a weak smile. At 11 a.m., we met the real estate agent at the house. I showed Cindy the rooms and pointed out areas needing work. It wasn't a luxury home, but it had enough space, private bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and a basement for storage or a playroom. "I like it," Cindy said. "It needs some work, but nothing we can't handle. Plenty of space for the kids, and the basement could be their playroom. If you're looking for my approval, you've got it." "Great. Let's make an offer and see what happens. It's been on the market for 4 months, so we might get a good deal." We told the agent we were ready to make an offer, and he was thrilled, likely due to the slow market. I made a low offer, expecting a counter, hoping to gauge how desperate the sellers were. The empty house suggested they might be carrying 2 mortgages. Afterward, Cindy offered to buy lunch, so we stopped at a sushi bar. She joked that Al would never eat there, and I laughed, glad to see her humor returning, though I knew it might be temporary until she faced Al. The weekend at the motel was lonely. Judy was out of my life, and even though we weren't close, it was still someone to talk to. Now, I was alone, and I couldn't see Cindy either. On Saturday, I took a walk by the river for a break, and spent the rest of the weekend catching up on work. By Sunday afternoon, I was back on track, and Mr. Lewis was pleased when I updated him on Monday. He mentioned a special project he wanted me to take on, so we arranged to meet on Tuesday. I also called Cindy, who had heard from Marta that all the divorce paperwork was ready. Cindy was nervous about telling Al and wanted to discuss her strategy. I suggested it might be better to have someone serve Al with the papers instead. Cindy was adamant. "No way. If someone else serves him, he'll go ballistic. I need to do this myself. Maybe I can make him understand how much he's hurt me and the kids. I'm not changing my mind or forgiving him. He brought this on himself, and I'm ending it. I let him off before, and it just let him walk all over me again. Fool me once. That's it." "I wish I could be there to help," I said, knowing she appreciated the thought, but also that it wasn't possible. "I'm doing it tomorrow morning. I probably won't sleep thinking about it, but I can't let the kids see this. I have to face him myself. It's the only way, she said firmly. Good luck, I offered. Tuesday morning, I followed my usual routine, gathered my laptop, and treated myself to a full breakfast at the motel restaurant. I laughed at still being frugal, despite my improved finances. After breakfast, I waited until rush hour passed before heading to Mr. Lewis's office. I couldn't stop thinking about how Cindy was handling Al. She was strong, but I knew this was tough for her. At my meeting with Mr. Lewis, he surprised me by proposing a huge project, translating manuals for tractors, backhoes, and forklifts from China. The scope was far beyond anything I'd done before. I'm not sure I can handle this alone, I admitted. It's a big project, and I'm not an expert on this equipment. Mr. Jake, you are very good at what you do. Can you find people to help? I'll pay $100 an hour. This is a big job, and I trust you to do it right, he urged. He was clearly relying on me, so I agreed to consider it. Let me review one of the manuals and see if I can make it work. Thank you, Mr. Jake. I trust you, he said gratefully. I left with a forklift manual in hand, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. As I drove, I thought of Cindy and felt a chill. I grabbed my phone, but hesitated to call. What if Al was still there? If things had gone wrong? I decided to wait until I reached her place. I arrived at Cindy's townhouse around 10:30 and noticed Al's car wasn't there. I called her and she answered softly. Hello? Cindy, it's Jake. Are you okay? I asked, concerned. Yeah, I'm okay, she replied. Can I come over? I'd like to see you. I'm right outside your door, she said, just making sure Al's gone. He is, I assured her. Come in, the coffee's ready. A moment later, I walked in to find Cindy at the kitchen table, looking exhausted, her eyes red from crying. Hi, I greeted her, sitting down beside her with a cup of coffee. What happened? I asked gently. She sighed, shaking her head. He completely broke down, Jake, crying, begging on his knees for another chance. It was so pathetic, it made me cry too. Did he agree to leave? I asked. Yes, though he tried to deny everything at first. When I mentioned Judy and why you're divorcing her, he looked like he was going to be sick. Then I brought up Mimi Tremont and what the girl at school said to Annie, and that's when he lost it. That sounds rough. How are you holding up? Not great, Jake. Like you, I feel like I wasted years. 10 years I can't get back. Part of me is angry, part of me is sad. There's a big difference between your 10 years and my 7, I said. Oh yeah? Like what? Like Annabeth and Bradley. Tears welled up in her eyes as I took her hands and gently squeezed them. Hold on, Cindy. You'll get through this. Cindy finally broke down, and I held her, letting her release all the pain. She was strong, and I knew she'd come out of this okay, even if it would hurt for a while. Tell me what happened, I urged. She composed herself enough to explain. She had Al sit in the kitchen while she told him she was filing for divorce. He tried to talk his way out of it, but Cindy was too prepared for that. When he realized he couldn't convince her otherwise, he played the sympathy card, bringing up the kids and their years together. But his act only made it easier for Cindy. His fake remorse didn't faze her, and she confronted him with all his betrayals, including the ones she had previously forgiven. By the end, Al was a mess. She had already packed a bag for him and told him to leave. He thought it was temporary until she handed him the divorce papers, making it clear he was gone for good. He left defeated, dragging his suitcase behind him. I wish I could have been there for you, Cindy, I said. No, Jake. I had to do this myself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Don't blame yourself because I'm upset. It had to be done, and it had to be done firmly. Well, I guess we're both starting new lives now, I said. I'm just glad you'll be part of mine. She looked at me intently. Are you having second thoughts about us? Of course not. It's your choice, Cindy. Whatever happens, it's up to you. Jake, that's a cop-out. You tell me you have feelings for me and then you leave it all to me? What kind of man are you? She challenged. I couldn't help but smile, and she couldn't help but smile back. Then she wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me deeply. I don't think we'll be apart anytime soon, she said. As expected, the offer on the house was countered, but it wasn't far from my ideal price. After a quick negotiation, the deal was done. I now owned a 4-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. I'm almost embarrassed by how easily I moved on from Judy. I've realized I never truly loved her, not the way my parents love each other. I've learned what real love feels like now, and it's different from what I had with Judy. Since signing the divorce papers, I haven't seen Judy. The final decree will come in February. Rumor has it she and Bobby left with little more than his Mercedes. His soon-to-be ex-wife is running the lab, and Judy seems to have lost her dreams twice. Al is still working at the Chevy dealership, but he's changed. His divorce from Cindy will be final in March. He visits the kids weekly, but stays low-key otherwise. The single life doesn't seem to suit him as much as he thought it would. Cindy, at my suggestion, decided not to ask for alimony or child support. Al's down, and neither of us would find satisfaction in kicking him further. We're financially secure, while Al struggles with mortgage payments and credit card debt. Playing around has proven costly for him. Cindy and I are a completely different story. She doesn't take crap from anyone, including me. I'll never understand why Al cheated on her. He deserves the dumbest man award. I love Cindy like crazy and would fight to keep her. When she says she loves me, I won't argue. I'm benefiting from her high opinion. I'm glad I stay in shape because I don't want to disappoint her. The fourth bedroom didn't stay a bedroom for long. After Cindy kicked Al out, she explained everything to the kids. Annie, aware of her dad's mistakes, took it better than Brad, but both needed reassurance they'd still see him. Brad was quiet for a few days, but eventually adjusted, as kids do. Cindy told them about the new house, big backyard, and that they'd stay in the same school, which eased their concerns. When she mentioned I'd be living with them, Brad cheered, and Annie nodded approval. They seemed to feel the same way about me as I did about them. Cindy said, "Kids pick up on adult vibes." We moved into the new house after Halloween. I took the kids trick-or-treating in their old neighborhood, and they enjoyed seeing familiar faces. No sign of Al, probably something he couldn't handle. I hired movers to make the transition smooth. Judy and I agreed on splitting furniture, and I avoided arguing over small things. Al, now living with a work friend, didn't need furniture, so we took care of it, ensuring he got half its value. I only had to buy a TV for the kids and a few dining room items. With Christmas approaching, I'm excited. I plan to spoil Cindy and the kids, but carefully, to avoid too much heat from Cindy. She knows how much I care about them, and that's made our new life easier, along with the improved Zex life. Cindy is far more passionate and uninhibited than what I was used to, and I'm doing just fine, thank you. To avoid disturbing the kids, I set up my office in the bedroom between theirs and ours. We've also embraced the benefits of working from home, turning happy hour into a midday affair. As for my career, I found a multilingual engineer perfect for Mr. Lewis's project. We secured a contract to produce manuals in English, French, and Spanish, as Mr. Louis eyes the American market. I have years of work ahead, not just for him, but for others who've discovered my skills. I'll need to expand to meet the growing demand. Cindy is my personal assistant, excelling at negotiations, scheduling, and finances. She's truly my partner. And to top it off, we're getting married during spring break in Hawaii, with our families joining us. Cindy's mother, a widow, will be there too. She never liked Al, so I'm starting fresh with her. This time, it's for keeps.